I'm here.
Did you have a busy day?
Always.
I can't remember, but I have another friend who's taking the bar this week, so I thought maybe it was today. All right. On that note, it is 6 p.m. So Ryan, are you the one to check on Channel 8 support? Are we ready to roll?
This is Carl from Channel 8, and we're live.
Carl, thank you. Okay, and I see a quorum, so we will get going. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Friend, a member of Boulder City Council. My pronouns are she and her, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting, and we are officially calling this meeting to order. This is a study session, so no roll call is required. Welcome to the Tuesday, February 23rd, 2021 study session of the Boulder City Council. Tonight, we will be discussing two items. First is possibly forming a library district. And second will be an update on the Xcel Energy partnership together with kind of the Muni wrap up. And first we have some announcements. And I'm told Ryan that we have slides for each. You are ahead of the game. Oh, I gotta exit you out. All right. So first is on COVID-19 exposure notifications. You can sign up or learn more about receiving exposure notifications on your phone at addyourphone.com. Second, for vaccinations, the state vaccine hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and answers are provided in multiple languages, including Spanish. You can call that hotline at 1-877-CO-VAX-CO. So it's 1-877-268-2926. And for more local information on getting your vaccine and to sign up for notifications, you can go to boco.org/COVID vaccine, notify sign up. And I assume that is on the slide as well. And as of February 22nd, for county residents, 25,167 are the number of people who have received one COVID-19 vaccine dose, again for Boulder County. And the number for a full course, 2 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine is 24,285. So that's first announcement. Second, new slide, please, will be boards and commissions. Our annual recruitment for the 2021 boards and commissions has closed for most of the boards or commissions. The city clerk's office is in the process of reviewing all applications to ensure applicants meet the requirements for the board or commission applied for, and is on schedule to have the application notebook. Well, it was posted, I believe, yesterday, February 22nd. We do, however, have 3 boards and commissions that did not receive enough applications to proceed on to the interview portion of recruitment. So we will continue to accept applications through 5 p.m. on March 18th, 2021 for the following boards. First, the Boulder Junction Access District Parking. Second, Boulder Junction Access District Travel Demand Management. And third, the Beverage Licensing Authority. If you are interested in applying for one of these boards, please view our boards and commissions website at bouldercolorado.gov/boards-commissions. All right, third announcement is on the Energy Partnership Advisory Panel. As we will discuss later tonight, the city and Xcel Energy are partnering and are now seeking a representative group of community members to serve on the first Energy Partnership Advisory Panel. The panel will meet regularly to review and discuss energy issues and provide feedback on projects and programs that arise from the partnership. The advisory panel will serve to connect the community to the new partnership by representing electricity and gas customers in Boulder in both residential and commercial sectors. The panel will review project proposals, gather perspectives on community impacts, and make recommendations to the partnership's project oversight team. Interested members of the community are invited to learn more about the working group and apply at bouldercolorado.gov/energy-future/Xcel-partnership. And I hope that's up on the slide. The application will close at 5 p.m. on February 26th. All right, with that, announcements are done. And now I will turn to our interim city manager, Chris Meschek, to kick off the staff presentations for the library district discussion.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Good evening, Council. For this item, we have a staff team that is here to support our two presenters tonight. We'll begin with David Gear from the City Attorney's Office and Cara Skinner from our Finance Department. So with that, I will turn it over to David.
Good evening, members of council. I'm David with the City Attorney's Office. Good to see all of you. Also with me tonight is Janet Michaels from our office, and she's been assisting with a lot of the work associated with the library district. We're here to answer questions about library district formation and the Colorado library law generally. Tonight, we're also going to talk about funding library services, library governance, and the process of library district formation. The municipal, we should be on slide 2 right now, by the way. The municipal library is governed by the city council with the advice of a library commission. In the future, however, it could also be governed by a separate government entity, a library district, with its own separate board of trustees. We're going to review the process for creating a library district, listen to the council's conversation, and answer any questions that you may have about tonight's topics. Library districts are governmental entities that use property taxes as the primary revenue source. Historically, as you all know, property taxes are amongst the most stable revenue services to fund governmental services. The issue of library funding and governance was raised as part of the library master plan that was adopted by the City Council in 2018. In 2019, an advocacy group called the Boulder Library Champions circulated a petition with the objective of forming a library district that included land both in the city and unincorporated Boulder County. It was presented to the Boulder County Clerk for signature verification. The timelines in the state library law are fast moving, and as the process was unfolding, the city asked the library champions to hold the petition for the 2019 election and let the city have a more robust discussion about library funding. In March 2020, the council was ready to start to have that discussion and a public hearing regarding the district. That discussion was interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. We're picking that conversation up now and intend to return to the council in April to ask the council whether it wants to look at approaches to fund the municipal library, or in the alternative, to start the process for creating a library district. So whoever's running this slide, if you could take me to slide 3. The city can continue its municipal library if it so chooses. In the alternative, there are 2 approaches to creating a library district under the Colorado library law. Governments that have the authority to create libraries can come together and through cooperation, adopt resolutions to create library districts. The other approach, as we experienced at least part of in 2019, is through a petition process. A group of petitioners can create a petition that meets the requirements of the library law and get the petition signed by at least 100 registered voters. The petition is then sent to the county commissioners. The governing bodies can establish the district, or if they choose not to, the council will schedule the matter for an election. Also during this process, if a governmental entity such as a city that already has a library, if they want to opt out, they have the opportunity to opt out of the district. Once formed, the remaining steps of creating a library district are the same for both processes, and I'll get into those in a little bit more detail in a moment. A question was asked about whether the city or county could just refer the entire question of a library district to the voters. The statute does not anticipate this option. However, I could foresee something similar could be accomplished by forming a district by resolution, entering into an IGA, and making the passage of a Tabor measure to fund the district a condition of the continuation of the district. There is no requirement that in the statute that the tax has to be approved by the voters at the inception of the district. That may occur in later years. So slide 4. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail now about each of the processes. So if you're going to establish a library district by resolution or ordinance, the process includes a public hearing that will be held by the governments forming the district. The hearing should include a discussion of the purposes of the district to be formed, and the hearing should also address the rights, powers, obligation, and responsibilities of each governmental entity involved. The resolution or ordinance will describe the proposed library service area, specify a mill levy and property tax dollars to be imposed, or the type or the amount of funding, and then also state that the electors of the library district will be required to approve any necessary tax levy that has not previously been approved. Upon adoption of the resolution or ordinance, the legislative bodies establish the district and provide for its financial support beginning on or before January 1st of the following the adoption of the resolution. And they also appoint the first board of trustees, 5 to 7 members of the library district. The legislative bodies thereafter may ratify the committee selections for the trustees. So if you could take me to slide 5. Next, the legislative body of each participating government will develop the IGA within 90 days. This time can be extended by mutual agreement of the parties. The IGA describes those rights and obligations discussed above that are parties to the agreement. The typical things that you see in the IGAs include addressing the transition from a municipal library to a library district, including things such as the ownership of real and personal property, how personnel that work for the library will be addressed, and provisions for the administrative services that a library may need during a transition. Also included is the method of trustee selection, and then whatever other terms the parties find reasonable and prudent. If the district wants to have an independent tax or independent revenue source, independent from the municipality or the county, it will need to conduct a Tabor election to establish an ad valorem property tax. So if you could move me to slide 6, please. If the establishment is by a petition of the registered election, the following procedures are used. The petitioners draft a petition that includes a request for the establishment of a library district, all of the governments that will be creating a library district, in our case, the city and the county, the proposed name of the district, a description of the service area, boundaries for the district, and a statement of the mill levy that may be imposed in the future and the amount of funding that the electors must approve of any tax not previously adopted before the district can be established. The petition is addressed, in our case, to the Boulder County commissioners because it includes land that is both in the unincorporated county as well as the city. Upon receipt of the petition, the county may pass a resolution or an ordinance that establishes the district. As I mentioned before, during this time, the city has the opportunity to opt out of the district if it does not want to participate. The county will set the ballot title and they'll submit the question of establishing the district to a vote at the November election. The Tabor election itself can be held concurrent with the formation issue, or it can be passed at a later date. But of course, as you all know, paper elections have to occur at the November election. Again, much like the petition or the resolution process, the legislative bodies are required to hold public hearings prior to the election where people have an opportunity to discuss the purpose of the library to be formed and the powers, rights, obligations, and responsibilities of each of the governmental entities that will be participating. If it's approved by the voters, the legislative bodies of each government will establish and provide for the financial support of the library beginning on January 1st of the year following the election. Typically, when it's a county municipal type arrangement, the basic effect of this is that the city continues to run the library as it has in the past. Again, very similar to the resolution process, Board of Trustees gets appointed, and then there is also an IGA created that addresses the transition from the library district or from the municipal library system to a library district. Next slide. So this slide here just simply demonstrates a sample timeline of how one might look to forming a library district either by resolution or ordinance, or if you were to go the petition route. Of course, this is conceptual, so it would need to be tailored to actual timelines and notices that are required in the statute. So with that said, I would like to turn it over to Kara Skinner and Devin Billingsley, who will talk a little bit about how we go about funding libraries.
Thanks, David, and good evening, Council. If we could go to the next slide.
Sarah, can I interrupt you 1 second?
Director.
Just
Oh,
make
sorry.
sure. I see a hand up. I want to ask Bob, is that something for later, or do you have a question before we keep going here?
I just wonder before we launch into finances, if it would be helpful if council members have questions of David on formation, or do we want to save those until the financial presentation?
I was going to save all questions till the end because they weren't built in, but if
I'm fine with that. I just was asking a procedural question. That's fine.
All right, thanks. Yep, let's just hold them. Thank you, Kara.
Sure. Okay, thanks. I'm Kara Skinner, Assistant Director of Finance. So we are going to now step into funding, and we're going to cover the total cost of service, different estimates for different levels of service. We're going to talk about 4 different library funding scenarios, and then specifically with regard to a library district, what the budget impact would be to the city's budget, and then other potential financial matters that we just want to provide context for council as they make this, as they have this discussion. So next slide. So first, we're going to talk about the total cost of providing library services. And the total current budget is comprised of the 2021 operating budget, which is $6.4 million funded by the general fund and $1.4 million funded by the library fund, which has a dedicated mill levy of 0.333 that helps provide funding for the library fund. So the total 2021 operating budget for the library is $7.8 million. Then the other cost of providing library services that is budgeted is administrative overhead, or what we commonly call cost allocation. And that is the cost of support services to the library, such as human resources, finance, information technology, facilities, things like that. And the total cost of that is $3.4 million, and that is funded by the general fund. It is just simply not reflected. If you look into the city's budget book at the library department budget, you won't see this captured there, but it is a true cost of providing library services. They do require that support. So if you add those two together, you have a total cost of $11.2 million that is funded in 2021. What is not funded, as we all know, that there was a reduction to the library budget for 2021 from what we had planned in 2020. And that is a budget gap due to the COVID-19 economic crisis and the resulting financial crunch for the city. So if we were to refund that, that would cost $1.3 million. In addition, we would need to fund North Boulder Library operating costs. And if we funded deferred capital maintenance of $2.3 million, that would be an additional $4.6 million of costs to meet a higher level of service. And that would be that meet community demand service level as identified in the master plan. So if you add those two together to meet this higher level of service, essentially to restore funding to what it was pre-COVID, to fund NOBO, and to address the deferred capital maintenance, the total cost of providing that level of service is $15.8 million. And stepping it up a little bit further, there was an expanded service level identified in the master plan, and we've identified the amount to fund that on an annual basis to be approximately $4.2 million. And what that expanded service level includes is full build out of the North Boulder Library with maker space and an outside playground. As you know, the scope of that project had to be reduced to fit within the budget. So to complete that project, expanded collections and materials, more activation and accessibility of the Canyon Theater, a gun barrel corner library, a corner library in Niwot, and an outreach program to the Latinx and senior populations. So if we had that additional level of service, that would cost $4.2 million for a total of $20 million. So total cost of library services at the expanded service level would be $20 million. And you'll see this 15.8 and the 20 million on some later slides. So next slide. So this is a map that has been shown at past presentations when we've discussed the library district. And the area defined by the red line is the boundary of Boulder city limits. And the area defined in green is the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan planning area. And the area defined by the black line is the proposed library district boundary that was discussed earlier and was used in the financial analysis in 2018 and in our funding scenarios presented on the next slide. And that greater black boundary is intended to capture more of the library patrons, which are denoted on this map by those gray dots. So you'll see that there are many gray dots within the boundary of the city, but then there are also many gray dots outside that boundary, but within the black boundary. So next slide. So this slide has a lot on it. I apologize, but I think we'll walk through it line by line and hopefully it will make sense. So this slide presents different funding options. And we have 4 different scenarios. So the first scenario, which is that top line, is a scenario of a library district funded by a dedicated property tax that would fund an expanded service level, generating $20 million a year. And with the boundary shown on the previous slide, the mill levy needed to generate that $20 million is 3.85 mils. And for all of these scenarios, we're going to demonstrate the impact of this new dedicated property tax mill levy on a representative residential property owner. And we assumed the market value of that property to be $850,000. So you can do the math if you wanted to calculate for a property that was half that. If it was a property with a market value of $425,000, then you would just split these numbers in half. But we're using $850,000, I think is actually less than the median in Boulder right now. So looking at that first scenario for the library district, we do have two numbers there, one for the county and one for the city, and I'll walk through why those are different. So for the county, this would be an increase of 3.85 mils. So the impact would be a $234 increase to their annual property tax bill. For properties within the city, we assume the property owners would only be assessed a total mill levy of 3.85 for the library. So the city's current mill levy, as I mentioned on a previous slide, the city currently has a 0.33 dedicated mill levy to the library. So we assume that that would go away. So the net mill levy increase for residents in the city is less because they already have a 0.33 that goes away. So then the net increase in mill levy for a city resident would only be 3.517. So that's why the impact to a city property owner would be less. And we have that being $214. So the next scenario is if the city's municipal library had a dedicated property tax that would fund expanded service levels similar to scenario one, that would generate $20 million a year. And the dedicated property tax or the mill levy that we would need to generate that would be 4.56 mils. And it's more because there are fewer property owners paying in to generate that same level of revenue. So the mill levy would be higher than what would be required for a library district. And the impact to the residential property owner of an $850,000 market value home would be that $257. So moving down to scenario three, this is a funding scenario where the city's municipal library had a dedicated property tax that would fund the total cost to meet community demand service level, as we sort of discussed on that previous slide. So this would fund the budget gap from COVID-19 reductions, fund North Boulder operating, and of course, fund the administrative overhead because we're saying it would fund the total cost. So the mill levy required to generate that $15.8 million would be 3.53 mils, which would result in $194 impact. And then last, this scenario four is sort of a hybrid scenario of current undedicated funding and potential additional increments of dedicated property tax. So I'll walk through this sort of line by line. So the top line assumes the city's current funding, which is that general fund support and the dedicated 0.333 mill levy would support that current level of funding, which is the 11.2 million, which you saw on that total cost slide. So that's sort of the status quo. We would have undedicated funding plus the current 0.33 mils to support the current level of funding. And then if we were wanting to add dedicated property tax to fund increments to improve our service level, this is the increments that you would need for each. So that next line, to fund the COVID-19 gap, which is 1.3 million, would require a dedicated mill of 0.32 mils. And the impact there, my little Zoom guy is covering it up, is $19 a year increase on the property tax bill. The next line, to generate enough to cover NOBO operating at $1 million would be 0.24 mils with a $15 annual impact. And the last line, to fund the deferred capital maintenance at 2.3 million would be 0.56 mils additional with an impact of 34. So the one last thing, and I hope that wasn't too painful, but the one last thing or comment I want to make about this is we have tended to focus on the residential property tax impact, as residential property owners are typically voters and they would want to understand the impact as they consider a decision. But commercial property would be impacted differently because of the different assessment rates for commercial property versus residential property. For an $850,000 market value commercial property, these numbers in this final column would be essentially 4 times greater. So in that first row, it would be close to $1,000, right? 900 and some dollars. So, and then the other thing to just keep in mind with commercial property is on average, their property, the value is much higher. So just think about that. That would be another, in all practicality, the impact would be more than $1,000 for commercial property owners. And next slide. So this slide was really just trying to capture high level. If a library district was formed, what would be the potential impact to the city budget? And we did decide to use the word potential city budget relief here. And the one reason why I think, and it might have been me, I looked to that word instead of savings, is that savings sort of seems to imply cost avoidance or reduced costs. And really there's 2 different things happening. There would be both reduced costs or avoided costs, but there's also the potential for new revenue. And new revenue offers relief, but we don't think of that as savings. So it's like, if we had a new revenue source to fund current costs, that would provide us budget relief. So hopefully that's not um, But so we do say that potential city budget relief over time could be up to $14.4 million. And the most direct and near-term relief is captured in that first bullet point, that it would free up current general fund budget of $6.4 million that could be used for other high priority needs. And then the other near-term relief, depending upon how the IGA is constructed and if the library district contracted with the city to continue to provide administrative support services, that would provide us a new revenue source to fund those costs that we do not currently have. So that would provide us relief. So if you add those 2 together, that's $9.8 million, close to $10 million. So there could be an immediate benefit to the city budget of approximately $10 million. We want to acknowledge that we say there would be no net budget relief related to the $1.4 million that the library fund currently funds, because we're assuming we would eliminate that mill levy. So while the costs would be avoided, we would also lose that revenue. So no net change. And then we did want to acknowledge at least that we do believe this would relieve future general fund budget pressure to fund the COVID-19 gap, North Boulder operating, and deferred capital maintenance. We did not, so if you add all that up, that gets you to the $14.4 million. We did not include those additional costs to fund that expanded service level. We think that that's probably very visionary, and whether the city would realistically be building that into the budget with its current revenue sources is not as likely. So we constrained this at the up to 14.4 million. And again, that would be over time. And it would depend upon the construct of the IGA and whether the city would provide administrative services to the district. So next slide. So last, as we did when we discussed the capital tax renewal with you last week, as you're considering library governance and funding, we wanted to provide you the context of other financial matters and tax policies that are being considered to have a holistic look. And so The capital infrastructure sales and use tax renewals, the first item listed here. The next two are potential new sales and use taxes that are being possibly contemplated by the county or the city. And then the following two are city taxes that are set to expire in the near term that council may consider a renewal action with those. So those are the big picture funding summary related to the library. And with that, I think next slide, I'm going to kick it back over to David Gare.
All right, well, I think that we were thinking that tonight it would be great to get council's questions on the table. And if you have any thoughts about how we want to go forward and how we will, how you would wish to see a public hearing structured in April, we would love to get some feedback from you, and so that we can kind of design a good meeting and a good discussion on kind of the next steps associated with governing the library as well as funding it. And in closing, Juana Gomez, one of the library commissioners, is on the call as well. And at CAC, they requested that a library commissioner be in attendance today and be provided an opportunity to say some words to the council as well. And I don't know if Juana wants to say.
At my cue.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, council, and thank you, David, for the introduction. I'm Juana Gomez. I am a commissioner for the library. And I wanted to reiterate our request for this evening. We would like council to seriously consider creating a library district by resolution that would allow for all these questions about how many dollars do we save, do we spend, how much would it cost to be resolved and outlined. It would allow an opportunity to figure out what happens to the assets of the library. It would provide guideposts for people to make decisions about whether this is a good idea or not. We would ask that council, it was brought up by one of the council members, creating a committee to further look into this. A subcommittee of council members and perhaps somebody from library commission, so that these questions and scenarios don't get lost in between meetings, so that there's a focus group looking into it and making sure all the questions are answered. We'd also like to ask council to restart the public discussion about the library district with an outreach of communication about what all this means and how does this benefit the city. Thank you.
Thanks, Juana. David or Chris or Cara, is that the end of staff presentation?
That is. We're available for questions and of course, look forward to listening to your conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Juana, David, and Cara. And Cara, I'm sorry I butchered your name on the front end here. So thanks for bearing with me on that. I see a couple hands up. So are there is there a staff slide with questions for council? All right, thanks. So let's start with just general questions about the presentation and general questions that you have, and then we'll get into the specific questions and discussion. So I see Sam up first, and then Aaron, Bob, and Mark. And real quick, wanted to make an announcement that Councilmember Nagel is on this Zoom call, but her volume isn't working on her computer, so she had to call in. So you may not be able to see her, but she is here, and I can see her hand when it goes up. So hi, Mirabai. Thanks for bearing with us. Okay, Sam, over to you.
Thanks very much, and thanks staff for the presentation. I guess first I'll ask it as a question. We have March 17th on the last slide for our next action. I assume that's supposed to be a different date. Is that correct?
That's correct. It should be April 20th. I think we were a victim of our own recycling in terms of the slides.
Okay, great. So just for the public who's watching, the next step will be a April 20th public hearing. If it would be possible to go back to slide 4, I guess I'll start really quickly with governance questions, and then I'll move on to some finance questions I have, but I'll start asking before we get there. David, this is probably for you. It talks about 90 days and then the ability. So I don't know if staff caught that. I do want to see slide 4 and 9 later, but 90 days, David, is that a requirement in some kind of statute or?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a statutory requirement, and basically how the process goes is that once the petition has been, that they've certified the signatures, then the county commissioners will send a notice to the city setting a date for a hearing on the ballot title that it is at least 90 days beyond the date of that notice. And within that time frame, up to 30 days before the commissioners take action on that ballot title, that's the period when the city, if it chooses to opt out, may opt out of the district.
So I get that if it's a petition route. So I followed all that. If it's a petition route, if we form it by ordinance, and there would be no election this year, say we form it by ordinance, and in the future years, there's a Tabor election. Would we have a 90-day requirement if we form it by ordinance?
I'd have to check the statute, but I believe, yeah, actually that looks like the 90 days is, I need to check the statute. I noticed that Janet Michaels just popped on. Do you have a response, Janet?
I do. There's not an, thank you. This is Janet Michaels with the City Attorney's Office. There is not an opt-out option when we pass a resolution or an ordinance to join the district. So that's it gives us an opt-out so that if a petition gets filed that we don't have control over, if you will, then we can opt out of being a part of the district. But if we want to participate in the formation of it, we're doing that by ordinance with a resolution from the county. So that's our choice. And so we can't back out of it, essentially.
Great. So I understand all of that. I'm sorry. Let me try rephrasing my question one more time. On slide 5, it says within 90 days, enter into an intergovernmental agreement. And
Great.
So there's a 90 days. And so is that 90 days to enter into an IGA from the time that council would adopt a formation resolution?
That's correct.
And so that 90 days to enter into an IGA is by the library statute?
Yes. And typically what I've learned from Kim Setter, who was at our last study session, that time can be extended, and it usually is.
Right. And so that's what I was going to ask, because if we had 90 days from a formation resolution to create an IGA, if we look at the IGA, it's a pretty complicated arrangement that would need to be made. So it seems like we definitely want to have that be something we could talk about, but that is required by statute unless we do something different.
That's
Got it.
correct.
Okay, super. And then I've got my slides up, so I'll go to slide 9 for those who want to follow along. And I just wanted to check a couple of things here. So the deferred capital maintenance has shown up in a few places. Is that deferred capital maintenance an annual expense?
This is Cara, and yes, that's correct. It's an annual, and it would be to, believe, address the backlog as well as it sort of smooths some major capital investments. If you smoothed that over time, you would need about 2.3 million a year to address the backlog and address future capital needs.
So how far out did we amortize the deferred capital maintenance in this sense? The question is because it seems like once we got past the deferred maintenance and we're on the regular maintenance schedule, then it would only be new capital that would be required. So how did we blend the deferred capital with the new capital, deferred maintenance with the new capital?
Yeah, I don't know that exact number. I can see if Devin Billingsley, our senior budget manager, knows that answer. And if not, we can clarify that in our follow-up to this study session, if that helps.
Thank you.
Yes, so that is something that we certainly can clarify, but I believe off the top of my head, it was either 10 or 15 years, but we can certainly confirm that.
Okay, it just seems like when we're past the deferred part, when we've caught up, I was curious if that would go down going forward or not. Another question about something, Kara, that you talked about, which is commercial properties. And so I was curious, are apartment buildings considered commercial properties?
So I can answer that. The answer is yes and no. So technically, when you assess them, they are only assessed at the currently the residential rate is 7.15%, whereas all other commercial properties are 29%. So for purposes of property tax calculations, they are actually more residential than they are commercial properties.
Got it. And so that means that the impact on renters is proportional to the property value, just like it is with homeowners. So I was just checking to see if renters would pay the higher commercial rate or not. So that's great to know. And then I guess the final question I've got is about the $14.4 million potential budget relief. So the deferred capital maintenance line of that is some blend of deferred capital and future expansion capital. And I understand that part. I wanted to dig into the NOBO operating just a bit. I think Bob had asked a question about this in the past recently, which was he didn't remember it being 1 million. And so is it 1 million loaded with the additional overhead, or is that 1 million direct and there's additional overhead on top of that?
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. I meant to address that in my presentation. So yes, the $1 million for operating has been the estimate for operating alone for the North Boulder Library. The number that Bob maybe you're remembering is the North Boulder Corner Library operating was around $300,000. So the new North Boulder Library operating has always been estimated based upon staffing needs and additional materials and things like that to be about $1 million.
Okay, and we have this $3.4 million, which appears not to have changed as we reduced the general fund budget from 7.5 million to 6.4 million, or whatever it was. There was a reduction because of COVID. So, and then we're adding back in the COVID-19 gap. And so I'm just curious, with both the COVID-19 gap and NOBO operating and deferred capital maintenance, with all of those added in, is it still 3.4 million will be the administrative overhead, or does that change? Because it seems like the general fund amount, if you look at it that way, would be larger if we had NOVA operating, deferred capital maintenance, and the COVID-19 gap. So how does the 3.4 million relate to either the current library budget or the increased library budget?
So I appreciate that question. And I actually think what you just mentioned sort of offsets, they might offset each other. So the 3.4 million does get, we have a cost allocation study that we do typically every 2 years. And so it does get revised based upon new budgets for those support departments. We are in the process of revamping our cost allocation methodology, and we will be doing a new updated cost allocation plan in 2022. So there is potential that, given the fact that some of those support departments budgets went down, that 3.4 million might go down because of that. But there is the potential that the library is going to need proportionately more services from those departments than they did before. So even though the budget went down, their cost share might go up. So things are going to move around. I think that 3.4 million is a conservative number. You know, in a year or two, it might be slightly different, but I think somewhere between $3 million and $3.4 million or $3.5 million in support needed for a budget of 16 million is probably in the ballpark. And I think that that's what we found too when we did comparables for library districts back in 2018, that ratio is pretty consistent.
Okay, very good. And then I guess this kind of ping pongs back a bit to your court, David, on formation, but it ties in with the finance. When we do a resolution, should we want to do a resolution, and I believe the library champions and the library commission would like us to do a resolution at the April 20th hearing, do we need to know the mill levy at that time?
Yes, that's one of the requirements of the statute, is that you're supposed to state what you believe the revenue needs of the district will be.
Great.
And then whether or not you have basically whether or not you have a tax for it yet.
Okay, and assuming that we wouldn't have a tax for it yet, we would put out what we expect the mill levy to be. And once we do that, say that we did that, and then through the process of the IGA and the recalculation of the overhead rates and things, that the amount that the future council decided it wanted to set up an IGA for, what if that was different than the mill levy, which was set in the resolution?
You know, the statute doesn't address, I don't believe the statute addresses that, and I can look into it a little bit further with Kim Setter. But I would imagine that there's probably some flexibility in there.
So when you say you imagine there would be some flexibility, that we could reform the library district with a different mill levy in the resolution, or that how would that be flexible?
Well, or change it. And I would just need to check, you know, to make sure that this is an accurate statement. But you know, the way it's worded in the statute, it's worded as more along the lines of you're supposed to declare what the estimate is. So to me, that seems to indicate that, you know, there might be a little bit of room for up and down. But I would check with Kim on that before I you know, drew a line in the sand. And then of course, yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, you know, there's also two places, you know, if you do the, you know, the county commissioners could put on a Tabor measure for the district. That's one approach. And that would usually be done right at the beginning. Or if it's in subsequent years, you know, the district board itself can do a Tabor measure. You know, once you have a board of trustees appointed and the authority to, you know, they're another tax, once they're formed, they're another taxing entity, and they can bring things to the ballot just as the city can bring things to the ballot.
Got it. It was a question because it seems like we're going to get a lot more detailed within the IGA. If we looked at the outline for the IGA that the Library Commission mailed to all of council, that outline doesn't have terms written into it or anything, but it talks about what you would need to know. And part of that is budget and use of funds and all of that, everything about the transfer. And so I just want to make sure that if we were thinking about doing something by resolution, we don't lock ourselves into a mill levy rate then when we haven't necessarily gone through the entire IGA process. And my last question, just to make sure I'm tracking, the IGA that would be put together after a district formation, would that IGA be between the city, the county, and the trustees of the district?
Yeah, the district.
So it would.
It would be, the IGA would be entered into by all the governmental entities that are throwing in for the district. And it's typically the people that have, responsibilities under the district. So whether or not, I'm not sure if the county would necessarily have to be a party to the district, but I think it's certainly that it would be anticipated. My guess is that, the county would not be throwing, unless, the county would not be throwing money into this. My guess is that they are more of an entity that has responsibilities that are described by state statute as opposed to things that they would otherwise do in terms of just providing governmental services. Our Boulder County does not provide library services now, so.
Got it. And so the anticipation is that if we don't involve the county through a petition process to form the district, if we form a district by resolution, establish the trustees of the district, seat them, then most of the IGA will be between the library district and the city with some kind of tangential involvement of the county per statute.
That's correct. And the county, of course, they speak on behalf of the unincorporated county. So they would, be the persons representing those folks. And under the statute, the first board of trustees, they lay out a statute, they lay out a process where the city puts a couple of people into a committee, the county puts a couple of people into a committee, and together that committee appoints the first board of trustees, which then gets ratified by the Boulder City Council and the Boulder County Commissioners.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, next we have Aaron and then Bob and Mark Wallach. Your hand was up and went down. So if you have questions, if you could put your hand up again, that would help. Over to Aaron.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Could we go to the slide that has the different funding scenarios, please? Thank you very much. So with this, so the first one is a library district, and the second two have substantial dedicated property taxes, and then the last one has small additional increments of dedicated property taxes. Just had a couple of questions about the scenarios. So for one, I believe that, Cara, the budget relief that you talked about, we would get that with the library district, but we wouldn't like with that fourth option, correct? You just have some additional increments of dedicated property tax.
That's correct.
No budget relief in that scenario, right?
Correct.
Thanks. And if we're interested in pursuing one of the property taxes, wouldn't we need a charter change because we're close to our charter limit on property taxes?
That is true. And let me correct what I just said. I was too quick to respond to your first question. That last scenario, those costs that are captured with additional mill levy, in a sense, they would give us budget relief because if we did not have those dedicated mill levies, those small increments, we would have general fund pressure to fund those costs in future budget years. And so like those amounts we did include in that 14.4 million. So I think that this $4.6 million that is the total of the bottom three lines of scenario 4, we could realize whichever increments you chose, relief up to that amount by the way that we have been describing budget relief, and that we would feel pressure. There would be budget pressure to fund those items in future budgets. And to the extent we didn't have to find that within our current budget, that would provide us relief if we had these dedicated mill levy.
Right. So it would take the pressure off
Yeah.
to refund
Correct.
those programs, but it wouldn't
Yeah.
provide the base budget relief of taking
Correct.
the library off the books as well as the
Correct.
cost allocation.
Correct. Okay, so I corrected that first answer. Now I forgot what the second question was.
So that these dedicated taxes, they would require a charter change, wouldn't they? Like, how far away are we from our charter limit on property taxes right now?
Oh, and I should have had.
So
It's close to 2 mils.
Oh, 2 mil, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was that?
It's close to 2 mils. It's
So
in
what we
that
have left.
neighborhood. There's a decimal point in there someplace.
Yeah, I think it's like 1.69 or something. Maybe we can see if we can scurry that up. But I think it's something less than 2 mils, something like 1.69.
That sounds
Okay,
right.
yeah, if you wouldn't mind throwing that number together when you get a chance.
Yep.
But anyway, if we wanted to fund with a dedicated property tax, we would need to not only have a Tabor election, but also a charter change, I believe. Is that right?
That's correct.
Aaron, can I clarify? Is that for options 1, 2, and 3, or just 2 and 3?
2 and 3.
Thanks.
So if we pursue a library district, there's no problems with the charter because it wouldn't be a municipal property tax. So our charter limit on property taxes wouldn't apply. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but that's my understanding.
That's my understanding too, but it says the language we're using is dedicated property tax, and the funding source for 1, 2, and 3 all says dedicated. So I just wanted to make sure you were talking about only for municipal dedicated property tax, not for district.
Yes, yeah, thanks for clarifying. So, all right, so now if we did get that budget relief, then the funds that were freed up, those would be essentially discretionary, right? Like we could use those for whatever purposes we felt like were the highest priority.
That's correct. So again, we did want to include this budget relief concept of the relieving us of the pressure of having to fund this. So say in a future budget year, if we had a dedicated mill levy to fund NOBO operating and our current revenue sources grew, we would be free to use that revenue source on other high priorities in the city.
Got it.
Directed.
Thanks. And would there be any limitations to prevent us setting up, say, a property tax relief program with some of those funds, say something that small businesses or individuals who are, for whom the incremental increase in property taxes would be difficult to, have a kind of a rebate program that people could apply to?
Yeah, there would be nothing that would stop you from doing some type of rebate program.
Okay, great. I mean, we're not the taxing entity, and necessarily, like if in a library district, we wouldn't be the taxing entity, but we could set, I guess you wouldn't necessarily exactly be rebating property taxes, but we could give grants, probably how it would end up working out.
I think either would work.
Either way. Okay,
Yeah.
Great. And Sam asked a couple of my questions. I think the one other one that I have is, could you go to the slide that lays out the schedules, the potential schedules, please? There are a couple timelines. There we go. Yeah, I was staring at this and it went away pretty quickly. But this is really helpful. So if we wanted to go the resolution ordinance route, could we have a public hearing on the resolution of the library district sooner in the process? Like, would there be anything stopping us from giving direction tonight to say, like, rather than have 2 public hearings, let's have our next public hearing be on whether we should have a resolution for the library district?
You could do that.
Okay. Thanks. Well, I guess I'll talk about that during our discussion portion of the evening. That's it for my questions. Thanks.
Thanks for keeping discussion cleanly away from questions, Aaron. Chris Meschuk, I see your hand up. Do you have something to add to Aaron's questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on the last, on one of Aaron's questions related to the mill levy rate. So the charter cap is 13 mills. Currently is what's listed in the charter, and we're at 11.981, if my memory serves me correctly, and Devin or Kara can correct me if I'm wrong. So that's our, it's just over 1 mil that I think is our room left before we would have to amend the charter.
Yes, Chris, you are 100% correct.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, I've got Bob and then Mark and then Mary after that.
And I've got a couple of questions for David. I had more, but Sam stole most of my thunder. So thank you, Sam, for that. David, just a couple of questions, and I do have several for Kara. I'm still struggling a little bit understanding the mill levy versus the Tabor vote. First of all, I guess first question is, under both scenarios, that is a resolution by the county and the city or a petition by residents, in both instances, does there have to be a declaration of the estimate of the mill levy?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know if that, to Sam's point about, well, what if we get it wrong? What if we put down a mill levy and then a year or two later there's a Tabor vote and it's wildly off? Do you know if people put down ranges of mill levies, which we said we think it's going to be more than 2 and less than 5, or do you have to pick a number?
That I would have to look that up and maybe
Okay.
talk to him about that idea.
When you look that up, maybe it'd be helpful to find out if other jurisdictions have gotten themselves in a situation where they've picked a mill levy and then the Tabor vote ends up being different. I guess the question is how much grace do you have there? So if you're doing that research, that'd be helpful. And then the only other question I have for David right now is, it sounds like the county is a party to this 3-way IGA, which has to be negotiated in a relatively short period of time. Have we reached out to the county? Have we had discussions with them, or do they kind of know that we're thinking about this?
They do. Frankly, I don't know the extent to which they know about the resolution or ordinance formation part, but I think that just in terms of conversation that have been had between the staffs, it's my understanding, at least with the prior commissioners, was that they were not particularly interested in forming a library district by petition, or not by petition, I'm sorry, by resolution or ordinance if the city was not on board with it. So I think that they would look to the city for leadership in terms of their support for going that route, which makes sense.
Sure. I mean, somebody might just, since we have 2 out of 3 new county commissioners as of a month and a half ago, somebody might just check in with the county staff and the county commissioners, give them a heads up that we're having these discussions so they're not blindsided this spring or summer. Could we go to slide 9? Okay, Sam almost asked my question. It's my understanding, Kara, that we're spending, or at least pre-COVID, we were spending about $300,000 in operating the NOBO hub. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And that 300,000 is presumably embedded either in the 7.8 million that we're spending this year or in the 1.3 million gap. I'm not sure how much of that 300,000 got cut. Maybe it's all in the 1.3 and all got cut, but somewhere in the 9.1 million steady state that we spend to operate the library system, there's 300,000 embedded for NOBO, right?
Correct.
Okay. And how much will it cost to operate the NOBO library going forward?
My understanding is the amount that we have been saying we need to add to the library's budget is $1 million.
Okay, so you said the word there that I wanted to make sure. So it's going to cost us 1.3 to operate NOBO library, or 1 million?
I will want to double check that.
Okay, so the increment might be 700,000 or the increment might be $1 million. Over the 300,000 we're spending now, is that right?
I believe the increment's 1 million, but I want to make sure that when that was decided, that was the additional budget needed for the new North Boulder Library, that took into account we would
300,000 we're already spending plus.
Right, right.
Okay.
So I just want to verify that, but it has always, to my knowledge, it has always been said that we needed $1 million additional operating to run the new North Boulder Library.
On top of the 300,000 we're already spending.
That's my understanding, but we will confirm that.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I want to make sure we don't double count that 300,000. Staying on slide 9, this is kind of a similar question to what Sam asked about the 2.3 million deferred capital maintenance. How much of that is backlog that's being amortized over a certain period of time versus how much of it is, oh, we should spend, $1 million a year or whatever to keep up the capital. So it'd be good to get that detail Sam has asked for, but I'd also appreciate the detail on the 4.2 million, because again, we have apples and oranges here. We have operating capital. So for example, one of the things that was mentioned that the 4.2 million would be spent on was there's like a $1 or $2 million capital shortfall on the construction of North Boulder Library. That of course is a one-time expense, but this 4.2 million is every year forever. So it'd be nice to break that down to how much of that is operating for the expanded services and how much of it is capital, either to finish Novo or to build gun barrel or whatever it is. If we could break that down between OPEX and CAPEX, that'd be super helpful.
Yep, we can do that.
And then if you could go to slide 12. The second bullet point is what I want to ask a question about. So this is money that we spend for salaries and benefits for centralized services like lawyers, IT, HR, that's allocated to the library, and it kind of goes up and down every year. Is that right?
That's correct. And there are a lot of fixed costs in there too, besides salaries. So like our core infrastructure for information technology and financial systems and things like that are foundational are included in that as well.
Thanks. And so this is our best guess at kind of true pass-through costs. I know it's an inexact science, but the idea is if one were to run a library standalone without city support, they would have to spend 3.4 million ish to get those services, or at least that's how much we allocate the central fund towards that. Is that right?
Correct.
So I'm trying to understand a little bit how that would be relief. I understand the 6.4 million general fund relief, the 3.4 million, and I think you did qualify this. You said that kind of depends on if the library buys these services. The library might buy these services for 1 or 2 years and then take it all in-house, or they might buy it forever, or they might not even want to buy it at all. But if this is truly pass-through, in other words, it's costing us $3.4 million to pay people to do this work, and then we're passing it through, and then the library district someday said, we don't need that anymore, we're going to take care of it inside, wouldn't we save some of that 3.4 million?
So that's correct. So if the library bought these services from us, we would have new revenue to fund those costs that currently general fund revenue is having to fund. So that's why it would be relief to us if they did pay us, because we'd have a new revenue source to fund those costs. And right now those costs are being covered by general fund resources. If they did not contract with us, we could avoid some of those costs, but not all. And so that is the unknown. How much of those costs could we truly avoid? And if we could, that would provide budget relief. But to the extent they did not buy those services from us, and we could not avoid those costs because a lot of them are lumpy and people can't be divided into parts and pieces easily. So we don't think we could, if they did not buy services from us, we do not believe we would have budget relief to the tune of 3.4 million. It may be 2 million, it might be 1.5 million, it would be some amount less than that.
But if we, I get that, so that's helpful. So, but if we're saying that we're going to incur these expenses, or at least some of these expenses anyway, is that 3.4? Is it really fair to say that it costs us 6.4 million plus some of those other numbers plus 3.4 to operate the library? If we have to spend that 3.4, if we need those lawyers and IT people and HR people and systems anyway, it's really not costing us that extra 3.4 million to operate the library. Because if we just shut the library's doors tomorrow, which we would never do, that 3.4 million, a lot of it wouldn't go away. We'd just keep spending. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So then going back to the earlier slide, when we added up how much it costs us to run the library, we should really back that 3.4 million out, right?
Well, I have to think about this, but I don't think I would back out the whole thing. And I think it's true that if it was a standalone entity, I think it would cost them 3.4 million to buy those services. So if we look at that slide, the total cost of providing these services, I think that what that was really trying to get at is if you are trying to buy services to run a library, it probably would cost you between $3 and $3.5 million to have those administrative services for you.
Right, but
Just
it's
hard
not costing us 3.4 million, because that sounds like a lot of that money we'll spend with or without a library. Is that right?
That's still costing us, though.
Right, but the library is not costing us. We've made a decision to have a legal staff of a certain size and an IT staff of a certain size and HR staff. And you said many of those costs would not be avoided if the library district chose not to buy from us.
True.
Okay, so some of that 3.4 million can be attributed to operating a library, but it sounds like a lot of it's not.
Well, actually, I do think at least 2 million is very directly related to the library.
Okay, that's helpful to break that out.
Yeah.
So about 2 million could be avoided if we didn't support the library, or the library district didn't want to buy from us, and 1.4 is unavoidable. Is that your rough estimate?
I think that's a good rough estimate.
That's helpful. That's all I have for right now.
Okay.
Can I colloquially?
Oh, yes, you may.
Sorry to interrupt, but just that, Bob, that was a good set of questions, but I don't think you could back any of it out of the current way that we talk about how much the library costs, because it is the library's, proportionate share of those centralized expenses of the entire city organization. So, in different hypotheticals where the library gets turned off or tries to provide all those services on their own, the numbers would work out a little bit differently. But I think it is the case that 3.4 million is the proportional share of the library's centralized costs.
I'm going to assume if we have further questions or points on that, we can get to a discussion. So thanks, Aaron. And Mark Wallach is up next.
Hey, thank you. My first question is for David. Can conveyance of library assets to the district be done by lease, or does it have to be a conveyance of fee title?
It could be done by lease. It could be done either way. And from what we've looked at of the other library districts that have been formed with municipal libraries, it's been done both ways.
So we can effectively ensure that those assets are not subject to any future financing by the library district?
Yes.
Okay. My next question, I guess, would be, I'm not sure who would answer it. I am just curious. Does anybody know what percentage of the voters in the proposed district live outside of the city of Boulder? Anybody?
I'm thinking.
30% says the library commissioner, Juana.
What was the number again?
30%.
Okay. Are there any estimates for future growth in salaries, expenses, inflation that are built into your estimates? If we're doing a library district and raising $15.8 million, how is that going to accommodate for future needs?
So when the, so when the financial analysis was originally conducted in 2018, they did account for growth on I believe, an annual basis of about, I think, 3% to 3.25% in that range. So that is accounted for to a certain extent.
But the tax itself will be relatively fixed, except to the extent that property values go up.
Okay. That is correct.
And I guess my last question would be, I think for Kara, we're using a calculation of the tax impact based on home values of $850,000. How did we arrive at that number?
I think that was the number that was used by the consultants back in 2018. And I think it was a median value for single family homes, something like that at the time. But again, you can do math around that. You know, clearly like multifamily home has condos and townhouses have probably a lower value. So,
I'm just concerned that may not appropriately state what the impact of the tax will be. I did some very sophisticated financial research today and looked on the MLS, and I found 12 listings of single family homes at $850,000 or under against 134 in excess of 850. So I mean, it says to me that we may be looking at a number that's a little low in terms of that.
right.
And I'm also, and I, I'll make this a question: is should we not break out in a little more detail what the impact will be on commercial properties? I would imagine most commercial properties are in excess of $850,000, and many by a great multiple of that. So I'm
Right. We do think that the average, I think, of the commercial property is closer to 3 million, or the median is closer to 3 million. We can provide a table and attach that to the study session summary that sort of provides a table of different assumed market values for both residential and commercial. And
I think that would be very helpful. Karen.
Okay.
Okay, I think you've covered my questions.
Okay, thanks. And I apologize, my camera all of a sudden on my computer decided it wanted to turn off. So I camera back on.
No
Rachel,
worries.
do you mind if I jump in and make a request for information that kind of dovetails onto Mark's?
You may.
Thank you. So Cara, that was real helpful. If you could actually provide 3 pieces of information. One is the impact to a median price of a house, whatever that is. I think it's above 850, as Mark says these days. Second is the impact, and of course, Gallagher will phase in over the Gallagher elimination will phase in over a long time. So let's just focus on now what the tax impact on an average commercial property would be. And the third element that I'd ask for is if, and this will be a little harder to calculate, but I'm going to guess that the good folks of Barra could probably help us with this, is how much would be the impact for tenants? I know that unlike commercial properties where taxes are generally passed straight through, residential tenants, which are about 53% of our residents, indirectly pay taxes, but eventually the landlords recoup that in the course of rents. If you could work with Barra and see if you could get a rough estimate from them about how much an average rent is, and what proportion of that is property taxes, and therefore what the increase would be at these mill levies, that would be real helpful for our residential tenants.
Okay, we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Bob and Mark and Cara. I wanted to note that Juana put in the chat that it's assessed value, not sales price, if that was not yet understood. And also wanted to ask, I saw David Farnan's hand up and then down. So David, did you have a response to a question that Mark Wallach asked?
No, thank you, Rachel. I some answers to questions along the way, but the last questions, I think it would be good to get us a chart. When we did the GK Baum study, the average assessed value of residential property in Boulder was $647,000. We upped that to $850 at the time in 2019 or 2020 when we were preparing the packet for city council, because again, council had said that the property values were significantly higher than that average assessed value. And as far as commercial properties, I mean, it is a good question. And the average, I believe, is 3 million. Over 40% of the commercial properties are valued at under $850,000. So for some perspective on there, the average may not give us what we're looking for, in the sense in which there are some rather large property holders which skew that average up to 3 million when 40% of the house commercial properties are valued at under 850.
Thank you, David. And I did not give you a chance to introduce yourself. Would you like to, for the record?
I'm David Farnan. I'm the Library and Arts Director for the City of Boulder.
Thank you. All right, thanks for that answer. And we may have more questions for you later. Mary, you are up next.
Thank you, Rachel. My first question has to do with slide number 3. We've been focusing on establishing it by ordinance or resolution, and I wanted to better understand the petition route. As I'm interpreting it here, is it you do the petition, you do the 100 signatures, and that 100 signatures plus the boundaries and proposed mill levy that would come through the petition, I presume, would establish the district. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the 100 signatures, that gets you on, that will get you on the ballot. So 100 verified signatures will get you a place on the ballot. When you go down to that second or the third box in the list, you kind of go into the loop in the statute that always kind of wants you to do it by resolution or ordinance, so that you can, it could be established at that point. Or if the county doesn't establish the district, the matter gets referred to the voters. And then if the voters approve it, it's formed. At that formation election time, you could have your Tabor election at that same election, or you could wait until a year from then and do a Tabor election in the subsequent year. And some districts do that or have done that. I think it's really kind of a question of strategy and, what you think will be successful.
Okay. And then, thank you. And then, so the district is established, and then I'm trying to understand that red line that goes out from district established. And
yeah, so
yeah,
okay.
so my question is the district established after the votes, the ballot measure is decided, or is the district established? I'm not understanding that red line over to appoint a board of trustees, and then underneath it where it says or referred to voters. Yeah, could you help me with that, please?
Sure. So I think that probably what's confusing about it is that, it's referring to two different things. There are two different paths that the county commissioners can take at this point in the process. First, the statute says consider establishing a district. They can establish the district. If they do that, then we have that time period where we can opt out before the commissioners set the ballot title.
Mm-hmm.
They just say, thanks for the petitioners. And then they just do what we normally do during ballot season. When you get a petition, you set a ballot title and send it to the county clerk for, for getting put on ballots for the November election. So it's two different processes. And if they do the district, which is why it's in red, and then the red arrow, if the district's established, the next step in the process is you appoint the board.
So this is where I'm getting hung up. So the board is established before the election.
If that's true, if the county commissioners create the district.
Okay.
They
so
take that choice as opposed to referring it to the voters. Right.
Okay, so the commissioners have two choices then. They
Yeah.
can either establish a district and then appoint the board, or they can refer the establishment to the voters.
Correct.
And then after the voters, if they decide they affirmative to the district, then the board is formed.
That's correct. And there's
Okay.
there's a recipe basically in the statute for how the two governmental entities cooperate in forming that first Board of Trustees.
Okay, got it. Thank you. That's very helpful. And then my next question has to do, I believe it is, and I need to go look at my version of the slides here that I have. It's the one that's got all the costs in it. I'm not finding it in my
total
question.
costs?
It's the one that's got the general fund 7.6 up at the top.
I think that might be slide 9. Is that right?
Okay.
I'm not, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Slide 9. So that's the one. So on slide 9, I wanted to better understand the budget gap due to COVID, 1.3. I'm trying to understand. So because of COVID, the library had to close. So it had to close because you couldn't have people congregating in the numbers that they usually do at the library. So because of the closure, then there was a resultant staff reduction. So how much of the budget is related to the closure? The budget gap is related to the closure versus how much of the budget gap is related to just the budget gap. So in other words, there were staff that were, there was really nowhere to go for work because it was closed. And then once it opens up, how many of the people would return to work if it is just a budget gap? Is that making sense?
So thank you, Mary. And we did talk about that during the budget process, and the reductions that were proposed by the library were, and David may jump in here too, but they were characterized as both budget reductions because of public health requirements, as well as budget reductions because of the need to offer up budget reductions because of the decline in revenue for the general fund. And I don't know that it's really parsed apart between those two causes, really.
Yeah, because I'm wondering, because at some point the library will reopen, and in order to have it function, there'll be a certain number of employees that have to return. So there would be a delta there.
But the library is not funded to return to pre-COVID levels of service, is my understanding. And David,
I see David. Yeah.
David Farnan might want to jump in and talk to this a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question, Mary. If I understand correctly, Cara is absolutely right. We do not have the funding to reopen the branches in the budget for 2021. We're going to do, we're going to do everything we can. We're trying to restructure some things to offer as much services as we possibly can, but the funding is the critical issue at this point. If we were to go to blue tomorrow, we do not have the capacity to open up the libraries. Is that
so? Yeah, that's kind of. So my understanding is that the branches won't be reopening, but that the main library would reopen. And it would have less capacity than pre-COVID. Nevertheless, it would be a difference between closed, because of COVID, and then full on operation. And in between full on operation and closure because of COVID, there is the post-COVID reopening level. So what is that difference? And is that the full 1.3?
Yeah, the majority, I I mean, Kara would have to clarify this, but the majority of the $1.3 million that the library reduced in funding for 2021 was personnel cost. So I believe that's in excess of 60% of all the cuts. We made cuts across the board in everything, collections, but the primary reductions were to staffing.
Right, right. So the staffing, once the library reopens, will the staffing level be the same as pre-COVID, or is it some intermediary?
No, not until funding were restored. So if funding were restored in 2022, yes, we would reopen the buildings with the pre-COVID levels of staffing. But until that time, those employees have been let go. So they're not. If COVID restrictions are lifted in 2021, we don't have a current plan for how to reopen the branches. I feel like we're getting
my question, I understand that branches will not be reopening. But in my understanding, go ahead.
Do you mind if I ask what I'm hearing your question as slightly differently?
Yeah, please, Aaron.
David, I think what I'm hearing the question of, which is a really interesting question, is to what extent does the 2021 budget include the $1.3 million budget gap just baked into the budget for both the main library and the branches, right? So that, like to Mary's point, that if suddenly the health issues went away tomorrow, to what extent do you have the budget in the 2021 budget to go back to normal versus how much of it is this full 1.3 budget gap that is not budgeted for in 2021?
So we are offering carryout services at Meadows and have been since August of last year with a short interim when the COVID went to red. We're hoping to be able to offer some level of carryout services at our other locations sometime in 2021. We repurpose staff to do home delivery to, I think we're calling every single patron who's over the age of 60 just to check in on them. So we have some staff who are available, who are working remotely, who are bound by some restrictions to COVID as well. So they're not going to be coming back to the building soon. We have gained assurances from, I'd say 99% of our staff that if COVID restrictions are lifted further, they would be willing and able to come back to work 100% on site. So the majority of our funding is staffing that are in public service buildings. They are the staff you see every single day, and that they constitute a portion of that $1.3 million. So there are some things that likely would not come back about Maine, Mary. I mean, the Canyon Theater, we don't anticipate being able to reopen in 2021. We're not really sure about the Makerspace in 2021. Both of those parts of the library have experienced not only COVID restrictions, but staffing reductions. And that's across the board. I mean, in every department, there have been staffing reductions, and including in public services and the branch staffing who work in public services at the branches.
So in 2021, I'm trying to figure out a way to rephrase my question, but what I'm hearing is that if the library were to reopen and it would just be the main branch, I understand that the smaller branches, the Meadows and the one in South Boulder, the Reynolds would not be reopening, only to do the carryout service. But the main library would open up with some level of staffing, minus the Canyon Theater and minus the Makerspace.
That's correct. We're open now. I mean, it's limited browsing, and no, you can't stay forever, but we have open computing on the second floor. We have limited browsing in the main library that you can come in and select your own books. So that exists now. I mean,
okay.
That would probably not expand dramatically, but we have had a lot of requests to open up the stacks so that patrons can come in and browse the entire collection again. I'd love to be able to do that. It won't happen until COVID restrictions are lifted and we have the funding. We can ensure that we can move around funding to ensure cleanliness.
So that, I guess that's my question, is reopening all that, what you just described, is that reopening based on COVID or funding or both?
It's both, Mary.
Okay. And right now that 1.3 budget gap is for both, but only for both plus the branches. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. I'm going to ask one question, maybe while David's nearby.
I have more
You're
questions.
not done? Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you have another?
I have more questions. Yeah, I think I have one more. Mark asked my one of my questions. So with respect to negotiating, I think this is kind of everybody's question. If we were to do it by resolution, there will ordinance or resolution, there would be a some staff resources that would be necessary in order to do that. And probably from both library and the city attorney's office and perhaps other departments. Do we have any idea about what kinds of resources would be required to create that IGA? And would we have to impact other things going on in the city? And to what extent is the capacity to negotiate the IGA impeded by COVID reductions in staff?
Well, our staff is down like many city departments, but I think that we, if this were a priority of the council, we would certainly put resources towards it to try to get it done.
But would we have to make decisions about things that don't get done in order to get this done?
Mary, that's a really good question. That in addition to the city attorney's office, library staff, finance staff, there's a whole group of staff that would probably be involved in working on an IGA if the council chose to go that route. So that might be a good question for us to follow up on and bring to the April public hearing as a follow-up item, just to make sure that we can answer that question on what the trade-offs would be. I think, as David described, if the direction of council is to move down the IGA path, we would rearrange the work plan to make it happen. I'm not sure what those trade-offs might be right now. I'd like to huddle up with the team to be able to understand what that would look like.
Thank you, Chris. And that would be, I think that would be, I would like to see that, is what would we have to, because invariably some things, there would be trade-offs and we would have to make some decisions of about what would fall off. So thank you.
Thanks.
And I think that is my last question. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Sam, I see your hand. I'm going to ask a couple of quick questions and then you'll get your double dip. So I think this is maybe to Chris or David Gear or David Farnan. What is the public hearing in April exactly? Like, what's going to be on the table for that? And then at some point we would usually receive a staff recommendation, like on slide 11, here's your 4 options. Here's what we think is the best one for the library. So I'm just wondering, like, when will we have, is that something that can be advised tonight? Is that coming in April? Because it seems to me the questions are sort of, do we want to look at forming a library district? Do we want to move forward with that? And do we want to do it by resolution? And I'm not sure if staff has opinions on that and if they would come out tonight or in April.
So I'll start, and I'll invite Chris and David to follow up on that as well. But so I guess I'm looking at April as being whatever the council wants it to be. When we were working on this in 2020, we were starting to kind of move down the road to actually get some direction from council on kind of the path that they would like to see the city take in terms of both governance and finance. And COVID kind of knocked us off our path, and we're starting to restart that. And frankly, we even took a step backwards. Like we're kind of retaking the same step that we took in February in terms of the background, the questions, and those types of things as well. So I guess I would love to hear what the council thinks. And in terms of, I know that both members of the Library Commission and the Boulder Library Champions has done some level of community engagement about the district. One of the things that we were talking about is that the council hasn't had the opportunity yet to let the community kind of weigh in and talk to them about it. So I guess it would be nice to have some kind of a little bit more formalized way to let the community kind of weigh in on some of the ideas around this topic.
So David, what I'm hearing, if I may just jump in here, Rachel, I'm hearing that essentially this is a political question. This is not a situation in which staff makes a recommendation. It's strictly a political question. Is that?
Well, I don't know that I would go that far, because I'm guessing that David Farnan has some probably pretty strong views about how libraries get funded. But there certainly is quite a large political component to this. A municipal library is a service that the city has been providing for, over 100 years. And I think that, the conversation around giving that up, I would consider that a big deal, that's a big conversation. And yeah, it kind of, a lot of that falls into the council's lap.
And maybe I'll just add on, I think David described it really well. This is a really big decision. And so what we were anticipating is that the April meeting would really be the opportunity, one, to hold a public hearing on this, and for council to then give the initial direction of which of these paths are you interested in potentially going down, if any of them. And really get that direction. That's what I think we as a staff, the library district, as well as the library champions are looking for is which route are we going to go? Are we going to look at keeping the library as a municipal service and exploring, continuing to explore funding? Are we going to begin down the library district route of making it a district service through either a petition process or a resolution process? So that's what we were envisioning, but I think as David described, it's really for I think council to help shape that in what you're looking for as well.
Okay, so you will be looking for us to vote in April on whether we want to proceed with a district and by resolution, if I'm hearing that correctly. I will say from my perspective, it would be helpful if there was a staff recommendation in there, because we usually do get those. Understanding Mary's point that it's a political question, it's still helpful, in my opinion, to hear from staff what is the recommendation for the best outcome for this department. So, and maybe just invite you before we get into discussion, because we're now 20 minutes over this whole agenda item and we haven't even gotten to discussion. So if I could just get clarified, what is it that you're looking for us to give feedback on tonight as we launch into this discussion after Sam and Mary's questions?
Well, I think you've given us a lot so far just by your questions. One of the things that I was really kind of hoping to hear tonight was the kind of things or the information or resources that council members need to be educated on the topic and ready to kind of start to provide some level of direction.
Thanks. Okay, Sam, you're next, and then Mary.
Thanks a bunch. And I know that we are over, Rachel. I acknowledge that. And it's a big topic. So there we go. On slide 9, some of the questions that were asked tickled me a bit to want to know. We've got this deferred capital maintenance line, 2.3 million. We're going to catch up on deferred, and then eventually that's going to go towards presumably additional capital. And then down at the bottom, we have unfunded needs for expanded service level, operating and capital, 4.2 million. And coincidentally, 4.2 million and 15.8 million adds up to 20.0 million. I was curious how the 4.2 million was derived, like what, and it seems to be ongoing ad infinitum. So how did that come about? Was that part of the master plan evaluation? I assume there's a bottom-up build-up for that.
It's a great question. It's a great question, Sam. And I believe you and Mark both alluded to how do you predict it out the funding in the future. And so the GK Baum study that was done in 2018, 2019 around funding for the library calculated all of the costs. The average cost of operating the library over the course of that 15-year timeframe that GK Baum did was roughly $20 million a year. And there are a number of costs that factor into that and a lot of assumptions and variables. And so that is really the best case scenario that they came up with in terms of what those operating costs would be. I can tell you, because I've been looking at it recently, over the course of those 15 years, roughly 20% of those costs go to capital maintenance. Roughly 7% of those costs, total accrued revenue, goes to new capital. And so the new capital funding is really around things that we don't know yet, right? So Reynolds is old. At some point, do we replace Reynolds or do we build a library in the eastern portion of Boulder County, above the city of Boulder? So all of those things are they're all speculative guesses. Having played around with the model ad infinitum, I feel pretty confident that those mill rates and the overall revenue is what's necessary because, again, going back to the assumptions, one bad year in property assessments and everything in that model goes out the window, right? So when we talk about expanded service level, the master plan paints some picture of that, but really they're not huge cost holes, right? Opening a Gun Barrel branch, opening a Niwot branch, activating the Canyon Theater, funding the collections at a level which we think is more appropriate to the city of Boulder in this area. Those are not major costs. They don't add up. What does add up is building a reserve, building a 20% reserve, and addressing those capital needs, especially the capital maintenance needs, which by my calculations are a little over 20% of the overall expenditures of a library district in 15 years.
Okay, that's helpful. Now, if we go to page 25 of the packet, so I'm jumping off the presentation here, jumping into the packet, that's where we show the library budget change over time. And I just want to make sure I'm interpreting that right. Before COVID hit, I believe we had a $9.1 million total budget for 2020, which was 1.6 million from the property tax, 7.5 million from the general fund. So leaving COVID out just for a moment, does the chart at the top of page 25 of the packet, ongoing library budget 2002 to 2020, does that show a 2.37% annual growth rate above inflation?
My understanding of that, this is Cara, and Devin can correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's that's the compound growth rate or the cumulative growth rate, not counting inflation. And then the 0.39% is if that was adjusted for inflation.
Yes, Cara, that is correct.
Okay, so just making sure then it sounds like the 5.6 million to 6.1 million is the inflation increase, and the 5.6 million to 9 million, as was budgeted before COVID, is a 2.37% annual budget increase for the library. Okay, super. Thank you. That's helpful. And then my last question is, again, about formation. David, this is for you. And I just wanted to understand on slide 4. It says the establishing entities determine the appropriate boundaries, period. Then there's another bullet that says public hearing or, and the next bullet says 90 days written notice of the proposed establishment to other governmental entities. So I assume the or means you either have a public hearing or you have 90 days to.
I think actually that's an error on the slide. That
Okay.
The 90 days written notice is part of the, it's part of the petition process.
Oh, 90 days is part of the petition process, not resolution and ordinance.
Yeah, I don't think so, no.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Carried over and.
I see. That perfect. That clears it up. Those are all my questions, Rachel.
Thank you, Sam. Mary?
Perfect segue. This is the slide I wanted to go to. The establishing entities appoint the first board of trustees, 5 or 7 members to the library district. After that, is it the council that continues to appoint ongoing members? And is it done through the regular boards and commissions process? How does that work?
Well, I think it can work a variety of ways. It just in terms of looking at how other library districts have done it, they've all been appointment processes. And so they vary from having one or another government. So, well, I'll just start. The first one, the first board of trustees, what the statute says is that the council identifies 2 people who will be on a committee. And then the Board of County Commissioners does the same. And that committee basically creates the first board of trustees. And then once they have selected their 5 or 7 members, then those slates get sent to each governmental entity for ratification. So that's how that's the first board. In terms of just kind of looking at various ways governments have done it, like Douglas County, the County Board of Commissioners does it. They're done different ways in different districts, whether they continue that ratification process, have one governmental entity or the other do it, and then some actually have the remaining board members appoint the new board members. So that's kind of the gamut. And after the first board it has been seated, one of the things that you can address in your IGA is how future boards will be appointed.
Okay, so that was my follow-up question. So that first board of trustees that is appointed by a committee of 2 council members and a committee of 2 people appointed by the county commissioners decides how the future trustees are appointed.
That's correct. Now, one thing I'll say is the council can appoint not city council member people to be on that committee.
Okay. And so then afterward, who is the board of trustees for the library district accountable to?
Well, I guess that they would be accountable. Well, the statute makes reference to the fact that trustees have a fiduciary obligation to the health of the district. When I kind of look at how the formation and how they're governed, it seems to me that it's more akin to being like a board of directors of a corporation or a nonprofit, or on a board for a nonprofit. You have a fiduciary obligation to make sure that the organization is run in a responsible manner, but it's not, it's not the same as being on city council, where all of you get the opportunity to run for election, as well as once you take your seats, you've been given, 14 different priorities, and you have a city manager that will ask you, would you help me balance these priorities? I don't think you would have that same kind of governance with the library district. It would be much more single purpose.
And so once a board of trustee is appointed, they serve out their term regardless of, they don't have to run for re-election. They're just appointed and they are beholden to the well-being of the district itself.
Yeah. And there are provisions in the statute that talk about and procedures for removal of commission members. I don't have that right off the top of my head, but I do recall that there is also, that in addition to the process for removal, I believe that there's also a requirement that whoever would toss such a member off the board or the board of trustees has to have good cause. So it's not a standardless decision that would be used to take such an action.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Thanks, David. I think we are, technically it's time to move into discussion, and I want to just quickly go through. Staff had asked us to answer a couple questions, or make sure that we answer these. So did we have questions about options for governance? I think people asked those as we went. Did we have questions about process and procedures for forming a library district? I think that one's checked off. And questions about funding options presented for either form of governance. I think we also did that. So question 4 is there additional information that council directs staff to prepare for the April 2021 public hearing? And my sense from David Gear's answer is that's what they were hoping for us to answer tonight and to walk away with so that they can prepare for the April hearing. So I also just want to summarize, I think there were some kind of buckets of information and questions that we wanted staff to really prepare for April, and then invite people to expand or weigh in if I'm getting this wrong. But one is, it sounds like we really want the nuts and bolts, like times 100 for the financial questions of possibly forming a district and where our finances are now, as well as what goes into the IGA and the considerations there. And then the questions will be teed up. Do we want to form a district? Do we want to do it by resolution? Do we want to get working on an IGA? And I think I heard some periphery sort of when might the ballot measure be teed up to go to voters? So I wanted to just present that to everyone for consideration as we go into discussion. I think that those are the questions that staff wants answered. I think that we have given staff a lot of information and prepare them to answer. So invite people to weigh in beyond that now. And the hands I see up, Mary, is yours up again? Or is that still up? Okay, so I see Mark, Bob, Mirabai, and Aaron. So let's start with Mark.
Just a quick comment. I think we need to add to the information that we need from staff is what is going to be displaced by this effort. If we're doing it by resolution, how much staff time, what will we have to forego in order to get this done? I think that's a pretty critical component of how we move forward. So that would be my request.
Thank you, Mark. Next, I see Bob.
I guess I have a kind of a question, and it's really for council as opposed to staff, because it will kind of inform my opinion on what to do about the resolution question. I kind of be curious. It sounds like we have the prerogative, we or petitioners have the prerogative of forming a district and asking the Tabor tax question right away, or deferring the Tabor tax question for some period of time, a year or two. And I guess I would ask my council colleagues, if people don't mind answering, how do folks feel about a Tabor tax question on a library district this year? Because if the answer is yes, I think it takes us down a certain procedural path. If the answer is no, it may take us down a different procedural path. And so, Rachel, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask that question of council. I don't know if you want to do that by straw poll or let everyone weigh in, but I'd love to know if people think we should ask the mill levy question on the November 2021 ballot.
Okay, I'm happy to do a straw poll on that. And I'm assuming that you think that's relevant tonight. I personally would rather answer it in conjunction with the April discussion, because I don't feel like I have all the information yet from staff in terms of what we would displace and whether we even want to form the district. That seems like a threshold question, but happy to do a straw poll. So I think
actually, Ray,
go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. Could I just request
straw poll first? Yeah, sure.
Could I just request that we do the straw poll after we've had a chance to chat a little bit? Because I have a couple thoughts on that question before I throw my hand up or down.
That's fine with me. So Bob, I'm going to put a pin in the straw poll, but we will get into it before we finish this discussion. Okay. Did you have another question, Bob? Or?
But I'm going to approach this exactly opposite from Aaron. I can't answer the question unless I know if there's going to be a tax question this year. So I can weigh in under both scenarios, but I'd really like to know where people are thinking.
All right, I will circle back to you. I think Mirabai is up next.
So I'm kind of with Bob. I do think that this is an important question to ask. And so I'll wait, I guess, till we have the discussion on it. But during the public hearing, I guess, and I understand that this is a difficult thing to ask of staff, but I guess maybe base it on the emails and the feedback that we've heard in the past in terms of what to have ready, because again, this is a very hot topic, as I'm sure we all know. And so the questions that I would have prepared is anything that the community might be asking. And obviously, again, you can't know what they're going to be asking, but maybe base that off of what they've asked in the past and the emails that we've received. So that would just be the one thing, is to be extremely prepped for the community and what they're going to be asking or stating during the public hearing.
Thanks, Mirabai. Aaron, I've got your hand up next.
Yeah, well, so sorry, Bob, and I guess Mirabai, I didn't mean to derail your comments. I guess I just wanted to get one comment out before we took a straw poll, and I'm fine having one after I get to say a couple words here. But the way I would think about the tax is that I would want to hold open the possibility of a Tabor election in 2021, but I would not say that we should definitively do it in 2021. I think, and that would, to me, would depend on like how much stimulus comes through, for example, to help us with our financial situation in the city, what our economy is looking like, you know, what the economic conditions are like in the city later on this year. So I would hold the possibility open and make a decision later this year.
Thanks.
And I have other thoughts, but do we want to? I'm fine doing the straw poll since I got to say my couple sentences.
Okay. I see Mark, Mary, and David Gear. Does anybody else have in terms of hands up, does anybody else have a comment on the timing of the straw poll? And Adam's hand is now up. Mary does. All right, Mary.
So I guess I'm going to answer the question that Bob posed. Seeing as I sit on the Financial Strategy Committee, and we are having conversations about the CCS tax, which I actually want to have renamed to Community Resilience and Safety Tax after what happened in Texas. But anyway, that's another matter. I'm really concerned that asking a Tabor question on top of that question could put at risk the I'll call it the infrastructure tax, and we really need to get that one resolved. And I don't want to risk that tax with another question.
Thank you for that. Adam, did you have a point on this before we do a straw poll? And then I'll come to you next, Mark.
Mine is a comment. I don't know where it fits I don't know if it should be pre-straw poll or not, to be honest, but I'll make it. In my mind, it's probably important that we change the maximum mill levy before we ask the question. Just a thought, since there's no point in asking it if we can't do it. And I don't know how that fits in the process at all, so.
Could I calculate that? So Adam, if we formed a district, we wouldn't have to change the mill levy limit.
Okay, I missed that part. So thanks for that, Aaron.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Aaron. Mark Wallach, thanks for your patience.
No problem. I have a very strong view on the timing issue. It is consistent with Mary's view. I'm also a member of the Financial Strategies Committee. I think the extension of the capital improvement tax is extremely important for this city. But any extension of a tax is a heavy lift, and I do not want to confuse that issue with a Tabor ballot measure relating to the library. I think it would be horrible timing, especially as we're still dealing with the pandemic and asking for approval of, in effect, 2 tax measures, I think is very unwise. So I'm happy to try to move the ball along a little bit with respect to the library district itself, but I would not want to see the Tabor tax measure this year. And I also suggest that its chance of passage might be a little better during a general election year than a special election year. So for all of those reasons, I would very much like to see that ballot measure or the Tabor measure not be on the ballot this year.
Thank you. Noted. Junie, I see your hand looks newly raised.
Thank you, Rachel. I did have a comment, and I think there were people ahead of me, but I know why you let me speak first, because I did mention that I was going to leave. And so can I ask the question or should I wait?
No, I go for it.
Thank you, Rachel. I think I understand Bob's comment, and I just wanted to add, I have a question first, and I think it might be for David. Is it for David or probably Kara? How many ballot measures do we intend to have this year? Because I know Mark mentioned, well, 1 or 2, but is that the max? Because I know that we will have a discussion in a couple of weeks, and we will be talking more about financing when it comes to services for the homeless. I don't know if that's going to be, we are even looking into a tax for that particular issue, but is it just these 2 for now? Because I'm wondering, we don't even know how many ballot measures will we have already. So how do we make the decision of whether to defer or not? Do we have a number on that?
Well, there was a slide that showed potential ballot measures in the presentation. And I don't have the slideshow in front of me. So there is an indication, but typically when we come to council in May for the kind of the pre-ballot season study session, staff will attempt to identify what the potential ballot measures will be based on the conversations that you all have had, as well as whatever we're hearing from our colleagues at the county, the state, and the school district.
Thank you. Yeah, I think for me, that's the only challenge, even though I fully support the districting. I do think if it's competing with another issue that is very important to me, I think it's going to be really hard. And then the thing is, even if we were to, maybe I guess the conflict that I have, or the problem for me is it necessary that we have the ballot measure this year coupled with the creation by resolution, or can we just have the creation and then, as we've discussed before, just put the tax, kick it down the can to the next council in a couple of years? And what difference would that make, basically?
you know, I couldn't have asked you to ask a better question, because I wanted to make a comment along those lines anyway. But one of the things that, you know, and I'll just maybe channel a little bit of Kim Setter when he was with the council last year. So one of the things that he, you know, and I know that people may perceive him as a very pro-district kind of person, but one of the things that Kim talks about a lot is that the benefits of exploring a district without your Tabor measure allows you to have that community conversation about what this district is going to look like, so that when you do the Tabor election, people know what they're truly know what they're voting on. And I guess as a way to kind of seal that deal, you know, he has talked about other library districts where they put a provision in the IGA that says continuity, you know, that the library district's formed, you lease all the property to it for a nickel. The city would usually finance it in the interim, just as we're financing it now. But that if they don't get a Tabor mill levy passed within, you know, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 elections, that the district will end.
Okay, thank you
So
for that.
You really do kind of put the decision into the voters' hands in that process of kind of a fully baked idea.
Thank you so much. I think that those were my only questions. I don't have a strong preference, just to answer Bob's question, deferring. I think, I just feel like I don't have the full picture. That's really the problem. I just don't know how many taxes we intend to have on the ballot. So I think that makes it a little bit fuzzy for me, because we're still having that discussion. So I don't have the answer whether we should defer or have it this year. And I just wanted to add as well, I will be leaving the meeting shortly. I just didn't want to miss this important meeting. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks for being here, Junie, and good luck to whatever's coming up for you. So does anybody mind if I do the straw poll now? Give me a, all right, we're doing the straw poll then. So I think the question that Bob is asking is, please raise your hand if you favor putting, let's see, if you favor putting the library district Tabor measure on the 2021 ballot. For sure. Does anybody just for sure want to put it on 2021 ballot? Does anybody, okay, so that one's done. Raise your hand if you do not want to decide that tonight. So that's the category I'm in. So I see 1, 2, 3, 4 of us in that category. And then raise your hand if you know that you do not want to put the library district Tabor measure on the 2021 ballot and would like to reserve that possibly for 2022 or beyond. So I see Bob, Sam, Mary, Mark, and Mirabai. So that's 5. So that is 5 for do not put it on in 2021. Okay, so that's straw poll for whatever that means. Not a firm vote, but whatever we can do in study sessions, straw poll accomplished. And now I see Sam and then Adam, Mary, and Aaron.
Thank you, Rachel. David, you couldn't have answered Junie's question any better to tee this up, so thank you for that. I think that the meat of this question is in what the IGA says. So if I look at the IGA outline, all the details about what's being transferred, when, how many Tabor elections could fail before you dissolve it, and so on and so forth, it seems to me like the IGA is the heart of the matter, and what's in the IGA is in the heart of the matter. And all that forming the district does is get some strawman people appointed to the the board, the trustee board, but we don't need that, because the IGA itself needs to really be driven by, I think, staff and council at the moment to come up with what the community wants. So for me, what I'm interested in hearing from the community and staff is what they propose for IGA terms on April 20th. So that's like what I would like to know. And I don't see a particular driver to do the formation. If we spent the rest of the year kind of working through the IGA and as council and as our community having the conversation that David referenced, which I think is great. I think we should have that conversation before we even form the district. Then I think we can make progress this year. And I'm not necessarily potentially even in favor of forming the district because I don't think we need to. Now, by the time it's the year that we're going to do a Tabor election, so say it was 2022, I would totally support forming a district if in conjunction we intend to go to the ballot and have a pretty good IGA kind of worked out, because the IGA is where all the action is. So that's really all I've got for tonight. Thanks to staff and thanks for putting up with a slightly longer meeting.
Thanks, Sam. Next up is Adam.
I had one more question that has probably been asked and answered, but is it good for FAQ prep for our April meeting? Who actually gets to vote on the IGA and the formation of the district? Do people who would be in the district but outside the city of Boulder get to vote on it? Like, how does that part work? Because I can't remember it.
Yeah, so if you were to form the district by resolution or ordinance, the Boulder City Council would make that decision, and the Board of County Commissioner would make it on behalf of anybody, if we're going to put unincorporated areas into the district. The funding of the district under Tabor requires to go to a vote at a November election. So the voters would ultimately, have the veto power to say, hey, either I'm all in, I'm ready to fund this, or I'm not.
Okay, so just trying to get this 100% certain. The formation of the district itself, we can just do that, right? Without voter approval?
Yes, you and the county. It's
Okay.
whoever, if you were to fund a district that was only the city limits, or establish a district that was only the city limits, it would only be you. But if you wanted to do one that included unincorporated areas, it's both.
Gotcha. And if we want to fund that, then the unincorporated people have to vote on it as well.
That's correct.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that we have that prepared for April.
Thanks, Adam. Mary, and then Aaron and Bob.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm going to bring up a question that'll probably boo me out of the room, but I'm going to do it anyway because I found the math really interesting. So Mark asked the question of how many people within the property tax revenue area of the proposed district boundaries come from outside of the city, and the answer was 30%. And so I took that 30% and I multiplied 15.8 million by 30%. That comes out to about 4.75 million, which when you subtract 4.75 million from 15.8, you end up with about 11 million, just a little over 11 million, which curiously enough is about the same amount that on slide 9, which is the current budget for the library. So, and then curiously enough, that 4.74 million is pretty close to 4.6. So, as the conversation went on, then I heard a question, somebody made the comment about, or it was the proposal for the city, the cost allocation, that the district would contract with the city to provide those services. So what if we flip that around and said the city provided library services to the people outside the city boundary, but within the proposed library district, which would then bring in that 4.75 million. And then the city, or let's call it a out of city district, would then contract with the city for library services. So if that would bring the whole budget up to 15.8 million. And then, so the question then becomes is, how could you set it up in a way that the people outside the city boundary, but within the proposed library district, would raise the money in order to pay the city for library services? It's a little bit different concept, but I think the resultant, the outcome is the same. So I guess my question is that something that could be done?
I have a question. It looks like David Farnan's going to be ready to answer that. Mary, is that something you want answered tonight, or something that we can put in the exciting packet for April? And then
I would
up for all of council. Mary did invite us to boo her, so I don't know if we want to like do that all at once, or just kidding.
But no, that can wait till the April memo, because
I
think we should let David have a quick crack at it.
Yeah, I feel compelled to answer. Juana Gomez, I believe, answered the question about 30%, and that's not inaccurate, but that 30% is not all encompassed by the district boundaries. So the district boundaries that the library champions drew actually encompasses 20%, an increase in 20% of assessed property values. So 80% of the assessed property value that would make up the revenue for the district is within the city of Boulder. 20% of the assessed property tax value that would make up the revenue for a library district is in that outer lying area. There are extensive numbers of patrons in Colorado and beyond the district boundaries that use the public library. So I think your math, Mary, while interesting, it doesn't hold up with regard to the assessed values of the property in the district boundaries.
thank you for that. I just went by the 30% number. So thank you.
Thanks, David. Okay, Aaron and then Bob. Oh, sorry, Mary, did you have more? Okay, Aaron and then Bob.
Good. Well, I mean, I would like for us to come back in April to see how we can move forward the library district in 2021. You know, we do have our library commission and many interested and devoted users of the library who feel like that's the best path forward to providing a stable revenue stream for our beloved local library system. So I want to see to what extent we can move that forward this year. Now, it sounds like, at least at this time, it's not a binding vote, but at this moment, majority of council wouldn't want to put something on the Tabor ballot for this year, but I think it would still behoove us to strongly consider forming a district this year. As Sam noted, the details of how it would work would be in the IGA, but you can't write and approve the IGA until you've formed the district. So I would like to see in April city staff bring forth kind of a clear path to passing a resolution that would form a district, and then move us forward on negotiating an IGA with the county and a future library district. So to me, that's kind of the clear path forward in terms of setting up a sustainable future for our library system. So I would just like staff to have, we're asking lots of questions about all the different routes, but I would just like to see that path laid out clearly as a potential path that we could hear from the public on as an alternative, and see if that's of interest to the public, and how we could move forward from that April meeting. And as part of that, I would really, like Rachel said, I would really request for the library department to weigh in. I mean, I get that this is fundamentally a choice by the elected officials here on city council, but I'd like to hear from the library department about their perspective on whether or not a district could accomplish the goals, and whether they feel like it'd be a good path forward for the library system.
Thanks, Aaron. And I was going to colloquy and say it would be helpful, again, if there's a staff recommendation attendant to that. So thanks for adding that in. We have Bob and then Mirabai.
Yeah, now that we're to opinions, I'm going to agree with Sam that there's a lot of work to be done on the IGA, and we, the city, the council and community, have opinions about that, whether we own the assets or lease the assets, how we're going to share services, how we're going to share employees, governance, a whole bunch of things. And it seems to me that creating the district without knowing the answers to those questions and then answering those questions is a little like the famous statement of one of our federal representatives who said, we have to vote on the bill before we find out what's in it. And I think we should find out what's in it first. I get the fact that there won't be a library district strawman trustee on the other side of the negotiating table, but I think that we because we're going to have ultimate veto power over the IGA, should take the time and put together an IGA and other terms and conditions that we feel comfortable with. And if a majority on council feels strongly, and I agree with Mark, I don't want to muck up the infrastructure tax, that we won't have a tax on the November ballot, it seems to me we've given ourselves a fairly long runway to answer those questions. That's, in other words, we're not under a shot clock to try to get all those questions answered by August. We have August plus a year. And so while I do want to advance this, and I'm happy to have a discussion or a public hearing or whatever people want to have in April, I think my preference is going to be to develop fully. We have we have more questions now than we did 3 hours ago. And so staff's got a lot of work to do, and we haven't even got into the IGA terms yet, or at least not most of them. And so my preference would be to this year answer those questions, move this forward, as people have suggested, and really have it fully baked so that when it comes back for the creation of a district, whether that's done by a council in the county or my preference by the people, that can be done in parallel with the tax question, and we'll have a fully formed idea of what a library district is rather than forming it and then trying to find out what we just created.
Thanks, Bob. Mirabai, bring us home.
Just I had one other thought, and again, I know this is difficult, and I don't know if this is possible with staff, but maybe you know how at the end of presentations you put up questions for us. I'm still curious to hear from the community, and so when we have this public comment, they're going to be talking about everything they're wanting or not wanting or their views. But if there's a staff presentation prior to open comment, which I'm hoping there will be, to bring them up to date, maybe you can put up some questions, a few pertinent questions that we really would like answered, so that maybe while they're giving their few minute speech, if they can just say yes, no to those questions, it just might be helpful. Again, I'm very curious in terms of what the community has to say, because I think we've been quite divided on this topic. And it would just be helpful when they're giving those comments to actually have some guidance with what they're saying, rather than just open-ended, these are my comments. And again, they can still, of course, add that in, but just 2 seconds of saying yes, no to what staff puts up, if that's a possibility.
Thanks, Mirabai. Okay, I would ask staff. Mirabai, we're not bringing it home yet. I'm sorry, Mary, one more question, comment?
Yeah, this is, I want to ask a clarifying question, I guess, of Bob, and to see if I understood correctly what he was proposing. So Bob, what you were proposing is to create the IGA without the formation of that 4-person committee that appoints the straw trustees, the straw man trustees, and that the city, we, the council, create this IGA. Then we're not bound to any kind of timelines. We can take our time to create that IGA, and then have the IGA basically done, and then go through that process of forming the committee and the trustees, the temporary trustees, and so that they can finish off the IGA that we already proposed, and then take that and the Tabor question to the voters next year. Is that what you proposed?
That's exactly what I'm proposing, Mary. Thank you. You summarized it better than I did. And I, just to be clear, I think the people who work on the IGA can be a cross section. It doesn't have to be just council or our city staff. We could have community members members, I would hope the members from the Library Commission, the library champions, perhaps even a one or two county residents who would be affected by this, who don't live in the city. Maybe the county wants to put some people up. So it can be a cross section, a diverse group of people who work through this IGA. But if we create the district this year, then we're under a shot clock of 90 days. And I understand it can be extended, but I'm not too sure exactly what the advantage of trying to rush the IGA this year. If we're not going to ask the real question, which is the tax question, until next year, why not put together that group of people, see if we can pull together an IGA. I don't know if that'll take us 2 months or 10 months, but take the time, since it looks like we're not going to ask the tax question next year either way, anyway, and then bottom this out and have some answers. That way we can form the district or ask the community to form the district and present the tax question all at the same time.
So if I could just respond to Bob's response. I like the idea, and I especially like the idea because it sort of spreads out the needed resources for creating the IGA, which is something that I have a real concern for, the staff resources. So my question for staff would then be to bring us the staff resources necessary to do, the shot clock version of the IGA, and then this spread out version that Bob just proposed. Thank you. That's all I have.
I'm going to call on Aaron, and I also just want to point out, I think we're getting a little bit away from tonight's study session, because I know that we will have another multi-hour discussion on whether to do a district this year. So we'll try and call it to a close after Aaron shares, but I think Junie left the meeting. So I also think, she wanted to be here for the library discussion, if I heard her correctly. So I don't want to creep beyond the study session, given that she already left. Aaron.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rachel. And I think we should settle these questions, at the next thing when we have a public hearing. But just one quick point I wanted to make to what Mary and Bob were just talking about is that, by statute, the IGA is approved by, if we went this path, the city council, the county commissioners, and the library trustees that we appoint. If we pre-create an IGA, it could very well get rejected by the legal bodies who were in charge of approving it afterwards. So there would be the risk of spending a lot of time and doing something and have it not get approved, as opposed to the process by statute where you form the district and then figure out the IGA. So
if I could just respond, I think the county would be at the table forming the IGA, so I don't think they're going to veto something that they've helped draft. And with respect to the trustees, I would select people that we think are going to be the trustees and have them participate in the preparation of the IGA. Then we're going to be pretty sure that once we appoint those people, they're going to bless what they just helped draft. So I think we can have the same human beings around the table. We're just not going to take the legal step of forming the district.
We can talk it over more in April.
Sounds like we're in for a fun discussion April 20th. Sam, that'll be over to you for that one. This is herding cats, I can tell you right now. So David, I wanted to check in with you. Did we answer all your questions? I gave you sort of a list of what I thought I heard during our questions. And then I think Mirabai, Adam, and Mark, and maybe Mary at the end added another. So wanted to make sure that was all captured and check out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, lots of great feedback. And, we'll be preparing a study session summary so that you guys can all have one last look of at least how we're interpreting it. And you can provide us with any feedback on the study session summary.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all the staff and commission members who were here tonight. So I would like for us to take a 2-minute break or whatever, 4-minute break if we need to, before we move into the next discussion of what comes after the Muni. So can I see somebody put up a little fire or something, if that's not okay? Okay, so we're just gonna do a super short break and try and be back here. I don't know, does staff can we just do 2 minutes? I'm gonna come back in 2 minutes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. All right, Bob, way to follow the 2-minute guideline there. Adam Maravik. All right, we got Aaron. Mark.
Everyone else's bathroom must be more than a minute away.
I mean, you try and be humane and build in that little break, but not have it, tumble into a 10-minute thing. Okay, so I think we're maybe just waiting for Sam and Mary. Oh, just Sam. Hi, Mary. I think I wait, right? Wait for Sam. Yeah. Although, Sam, if you are here and just have your camera off, please let us know. So now we know 2 minutes is ambitious. Just build in the 5. Does anybody have the protocols? Like, let's say that Sam just decided he's going to bed. What is the time that we wait here?
We go ahead and get started because we do not need a quorum and it's
Oh, here he is anyhow. Okay, perfect. All right, so we are going to now turn to the second issue for the night, which is kind of follow up on the wrap up of the Muni and the new Xcel partnership. So I'm going to pass this over to Chris Meschuk to get us going, please.
Thanks, Rachel. And I will be quick and turn it right over to Jonathan Cohen and the rest of the team that is here tonight to present this item.
Great. Thanks for the quick handoff there, Chris. Good evening, Mayor, members of council. I am Jonathan Cohen. I'm the acting director of the Climate Initiatives Department. So as far as the team joining tonight, Carolyn Elam, the city's energy manager in the Climate Initiatives Department, who is also managing the Xcel partnership efforts, is going to be joining, giving part of this presentation. So why don't we go ahead and go to the next slide and we'll jump right in. So just doing a quick look at our agenda, we have about an hour scheduled together. I know you've had a long night, so we'll try to move through the slides relatively quickly. Tonight is really broadly centered on our energy and climate work, but really focused on 2 very specific items. First is a quick update on the wrap-up efforts related to municipalization, followed by a deeper dive on the work that's really taking place since last November's vote, including a bit of mapping on the work that's currently taking shape on the partnership. I did want to point out on the agenda that we do have Iffy Jennings, who is Xcel's new Boulder area regional manager. She is with us tonight, and she has some brief words to say to council when we get to that point. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Great. So we do have a few questions for council. They're fairly general. I won't read them out loud. And of course, we'll bring them back up at the end of the presentation, but really just any questions that council has with respect to the wrap up of Muni and then how we're moving forward on the partnership activities. Next slide, please. So to start with, and you can go ahead and click again, we have 2 parts of this slide. So I wanted to start with a bit of grounding for tonight's discussion. We've spoken often that electricity generation and energy more broadly has consistently represented the majority of Boulder's emissions, and that really makes it a key target for our climate action. And it has really been decades that our community has prioritized an energy system that is renewable, local, accessible, reliable, and secure. You can see those words on your screen. And it's really that framing that's consistently driven so many of our policies and programs locally. On the right-hand side of your screen, it's a reminder that Council has also endorsed a package of relatively ambitious energy targets, including an aggressive 100% renewable electricity target by 2030. Now, the reason I mention that is that our ability to rapidly and equitably decarbonize our energy supply was really the driving factor for municipalization. And it's going to continue to be the driving factor in our activities moving forward through the Xcel partnership. So the goals on your screen are really critical because they provide the backstop to our broader work. Just as the creation of a local electric utility was intended to be a tool for achieving our community's goals, the new partnership is really intended to be a tool as well. I also want to mention that staff is preparing a new set of science-based targets that really go beyond emissions mitigation and allow us to track progress in our efforts related to adaptation and resilience, as well as progress towards our equity values. We do plan to start socializing these with the community in the next month or so, and that will lead up to a May study session with Council. Next slide, please. So just a very quick reminder around some of the municipalization discussion. Between 2010 and 2020, the city's primary strategy to change how the community's energy was generated was to bring local control of electricity to the community through municipalization, or the creation of a local city-run electric utility. Municipalization was really from the beginning a community-driven effort. And as we know, last November, after many months of negotiations between the city and Xcel, voters approved a new settlement agreement, really signaling the community's desire to pause municipalization for now and instead focus on partnering with Xcel Energy. Next slide, please. So to essentially close out municipalization at this point, our muni team has been focused on a handful of activities really over the past couple of months since the November vote. The first relates to funding. Council will likely recall that prior to 2018, in addition to the utility occupation tax funding, roughly $1.5 million was allocated from the general fund to supplement staffing and really unplanned litigation and transition expenses that were not part of the project's original budget. I am happy to report that by suspending a portion of the technical and legal work leading up to the November vote, provided enough excess to repay the reserves with the closing of the 2020 books. I will point out that attachment C in your memo is really that final accounting of the municipalization expenditures. The second part of our closeout is really thinking about how we suspend the city's efforts to municipalize. Remember that the settlement does suspend those activities, but the franchise agreement has provisions for the city to opt out under certain conditions in the future. Remember, we spent nearly 10 years or over 10 years in an adversarial relationship with Xcel, so the partnership was built recognizing that reality, which is why we have those opt-outs. So if we determine that continuing with the partnership is no longer in the best interest of the community, council, of course, would need to decide whether to recommence the municipalization effort, and in particular, the funding mechanism necessary to continue that process. So to be prepared in that event, if that situation arises, the staff team has been documenting all of our municipalization work activities, archiving pertinent records, including our engineering designs and system information. That said, I really want to stress that in these first few months, our teams of the city and Xcel's teams have really come together in a way I've not personally experienced historically, and I'm confident that we're building a solid collaborative working relationship. So finally, the third point on your screen, we really have covered a lot of territory over the past 10 plus years and made what I see as an unbelievable amount of progress on a really complex issue. the tremendous body of work that was completed by the staff and community won't be wasted. And I really want to stress that point. In fact, so much of what we learned through the municipalization process is serving us in the partnership. We're carrying forward all of that critical information and all of the lessons learned. There is additional detail, of course, on the specific wrap-up efforts on page 13 of your memo if you'd like to see some additional detail. So before I turn it over to Carolyn to talk about the partnership activities, I did want to reflect that really throughout the history of municipalization, our community was divided. To many, the vote last November was overdue, and to many, it was a disappointment. And while I believe there is general agreement around our community's energy goals, I do think there's still some division on the best way to get there. Now, I raise that because I want to take this important moment to really thank the incredible staff team, the many long hours we spent with council, and the leadership that you and former councils showed on this issue. But most importantly, I do want to deeply thank our community. The countless hours that our community volunteered, the numerous debates, and the overall engagement on this issue was really extraordinary, regardless of what side of the issue community members found themselves on. So I think we have not had an opportunity to say that publicly since the vote, and I wanted to take that opportunity. So I do want to welcome Carolyn Elam, who will take you through the rest and probably more exciting part of the presentation. So Carolyn, I think we're ready for you to jump in.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And thank you, Council, for having us this evening. So again, as Jonathan mentioned, I'm Carolyn Elam. I'm the Energy Manager in Climate Initiatives. And just as some background, since I joined the city about 3 years ago, I've been really leading our efficiency and local generation goals. So the energy work outside of municipalization in our department. And I'm just really excited to be launching this partnership with Xcel and really kind of accelerating the goals that we've laid the foundation for, both through the municipalization work and our work outside of that effort. So next slide. And then again, next slide, thank you. So I won't rehash the timeline. I just wanted to really note that all of the work that council and the community and the city put forth in Xcel leading up to the vote really laid the foundation for what we're going to talk about tonight. And what I'm really going to talk to you is what we've been doing since the decision that occurred in November to launch the franchise and really get us up and running. Next slide. Before I really dive into where we're at with the partnership, we did wanted to provide a brief update to council on the status of the franchise agreement itself. So the legal document that governs our both franchise and partnership with Xcel. So just as background, that does get filed with the Public Utilities Commission. So following the vote in November and the adoption by council of the ordinance that adopts that franchise, Xcel Energy did file that with the Public Utilities Commission in the latter part of December. We did want to let you know that as allowed within that process, there is opportunity for interested parties to intervene. And so while it's not typical in a franchise for there to be much of a engagement with the external parties or even the Public Utilities Commission, I think it's no surprise that, just with some of the nuances of our franchise agreement, there was some interest. And so we did have 3 parties intervene with the PUC. The PUC has since referred that to their authority having jurisdiction to review the case and set a hearing schedule. So we have not formally adopted the franchise. We can answer any questions about that, but just wanted to let you know that we are expecting that process to go throughout the coming months. We are a party to that process as well, so we'll certainly keep council informed, and we're there to support Xcel and the commission as they review any of the concerns that the outside parties may raise through that process. I think the most important message, though, is as far as the city and Xcel are concerned, we remain committed to the partnership, and we're not slowing down progress as we continue to support that proceeding. So just wanted to make that clear to the community. And we'll be happy to answer any questions about that as well. Next slide. So again, just the founding principles of the partnership. It's really to advance our goals around our greenhouse gas emissions reduction, to help us as we seek to eliminate our natural gas use through electrification of our buildings and our other fossil fuel use through electrifying our transportation system. It's really to help us boost our resilience of our electricity system and our gas system as we face the realities of climate change and some of the stressors that come with that. And then founding that is really addressing our equity goals and delivering a more equitable solution that meets all of our community's energy needs, recognizing that we have a ways to close that gap. Next slide. So the partnership agreement outlined kind of a governance structure. So with the passing of the franchise, we've been working to stand up that structure and start to put the parts and pieces in place. So that includes the executive team, which is a joint team with our city leadership. So Chris, Jonathan, and some key members of our executive team, as well as the Xcel team, so Alice Jackson and her leadership team serving on the executive team. We have our project oversight team, which is really managing the day-to-day work, helping inform priorities. And then I wanted to talk about working groups. So we didn't really outline this in the partnership agreement, but they're really core to the operational excellence of the agreement. So we've been standing up those groups as well. That really brings in the subject matter expertise from both the city and from Xcel. And thank you to Councilperson Friend for talking about our advisory panel recruitment at the beginning of tonight's study session. We are really excited to be seating our advisory panel. As mentioned, our application process does close this Friday. I'm excited to report we've just had tremendous interest from the community. As of this evening, we've had 74 applicants that yeah. Sorry, I know it's a big number. I'm so excited. And it represents the breadth of our community. So a lot of residents, businesses, some associations. So really what we were hoping for. I still encourage people to apply, to participate, because I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. With that kind of interest in our group, we've really thought about what the balance of engagement really looks like. Everybody who applies to be a member of that panel is going to have an opportunity to provide input to the agreement even if we don't formally seat them on the panel. So really looking forward to that. Just to outline the process, because we do have a large number of applicants, we do expect to work through March to really screen those, conduct some phone interviews with folks, and work towards seating our panel towards the latter part of the month. So with that, we'll be looking to really kick off that advisory panel function in the April timeframe. And so we'll be really kicking off publicly the process of participating in the partnership at that point in time. Next slide. I'm going to talk about some of our project successes so far, but I did want to throw this slide up. I am not going through all these names, but I did want to really just mention that while Jonathan and I are here talking to you this evening, this is a citywide effort, and we really have leadership throughout the organization for key aspects of this partnership. And these are just the folks who I've had key discussions with, meetings. They've been in meetings with Xcel so far in just these first couple of months, and that list is going to grow. And if I look to Xcel, it's a similar level of effort on their side. We really are collectively committed to making this a success, and it touches on every point. And I'll talk about some examples, but thinking about our leadership from transportation, on how we underground our system, how we transition our streetlight system, how we plan to electrify our fleets. So everybody on this list is really playing a critical role, and it's going to continue to grow. And I just really value the partners throughout the city that have really, rolled up their sleeves and dove into this partnership with us. Next slide. So key project areas that we highlighted in our memo in some more detail, but I just wanted to touch on here. So distribution planning, this is really how we continue to invest in our infrastructure, both our electricity and our gas infrastructure, to advance our goals, which include our resiliency and our equity goals. Highlights of work here is really working with Xcel to get details on our historical reliability, understanding where some of our challenges are, looking at some of our future investments, working with them and our city departments to plan what some of our load growth might be around deploying electric vehicle charging infrastructure, as we really think about how we want to transition our buildings to cleaner, healthier building stock. So it's a lot of work really standing up the foundation and what projects are going to flow from that going forward. We have had kickoffs for our Alpine Balsam project. So looking at our energy infrastructure opportunities there, as well as Chautauqua and the sustainability plan there, and really thinking about what the feasibility looks like for different projects at both places. So we've already launched that and are continuing to work with those teams to get those projects off the ground. In the undergrounding area, I think you'll see in one of the attachments to your memo, attachment B, we've laid out a lot of the criteria for how we're going to inform a 5-year undergrounding plan, which is really going to identify what some of our key priorities are and how we'll make decisions on investment going forward. We are looking to start our undergrounding fairly aggressively, looking at potentially undergrounding as part of our reconstruction project at North Broadway. We're really thinking about how we can use that project to pilot a joint trench standard, which will collectively save money for both the city and Xcel moving forward. So we're moving forward on that as well. 100% renewable electricity in the coming months. Xcel will be filing their energy resource plan. So by the end of March, we'll really have an idea of where they're going to be. And then we'll kickstart projects and working groups to really plan on how we as a city and a community in partnership with Xcel are going to close the gap between where Xcel is projecting to be and what our community's goals are. Climate policy, we've been supporting Senator Fenberg as he pursues potential legislation to really remove some of the barriers to solar adoption for customer side systems. So the 120% cap is what you've probably most commonly heard from, and so continuing to move forward with that. Streetlights have long been a concern of our community. We know that many communities have been converting to high efficiency LEDs. We are exploring how to get there with our system. Just to give you an idea, we have about 4,700 lights, street lights that are owned and operated by Xcel, and another 400 that are owned and operated by the city at this point in time. And how do we merge that system and make it a high performing system? We've conducted the baseline assessment of where we can get with Xcel's existing programs, and then we're collectively working with them to explore options, which could include our acquisition of the streetlight system. So we'll have more information on that in the about 3 to 4 months as we complete that study. I'll talk about communications and engagement in a minute, so we can go to the next slide. We have been working to collectively develop a more detailed plan for the balance of this year, really focusing on our near term, so next month goals, as well as into the midsummer goal and the end of the year. So as I noted, we've already stood up our governance structure. We've launched our advisory panel recruitment. We'll seat that panel. We developed a preliminary communication plan, really highlighting what our needs are going to be and charter our initial working groups. By the end of March, we're hoping to seat our panel, have a very clear idea of what our engagement plan is going to be for the balance of the year. We're going to have a first draft of our undergrounding priorities out there. We're going to launch some additional projects. And really by the end of the year, we want to have a solid plan on how we're going to close the gap, what our interim targets are going to be for getting to our 100% goal. I talked about finalizing street lighting conversion and many other projects, so we can talk about this in more detail, but just wanted to highlight that's where we plan to go with the balance, with some very good engagement throughout this process, which takes me to the next slide. So as we heard the gas, we do have already 74 community members have expressed interest in this, which I think is very telling about how important energy is to the breadth of our community. So with that, we want to be very clear that the advisory panel is not the only means by which our community is going to engage with us. We do plan to stand up working groups with technical experts. We plan to use individuals who have expressed an interest in the advisory panel to serve in focus groups. There's going to be quarterly public engagement events where we'll give updates to the community. They can ask questions. We're going to have technical presentations, with the first one targeted for April on some of our specific projects. So we are really committed to keeping the community engaged and really providing many opportunities to them to participate, as well as opportunities for council to participate. So just wanted to highlight that, and we'll be doing a lot of recruitment and participation over the balance of this year once we seat our advisory panel. And finally, next slide. We do have a question for council later, just making sure that we're hitting the appropriate touch points to keep you informed as well. So our thoughts at this point are an annual study session such as this one to provide updates and engage and make sure we're heading in the correct direction. We do anticipate using information packets for specific issues or topics of interest. Obviously, we still have email heads up, hotline posts. We have the climate and energy newsletter, which would be our routine conversations, and then the community meetings that I mentioned briefly. So we'll come back and ask some questions about that. With that, next slide. So I did want to take an opportunity. I've had the pleasure of working with Iffy since she joined Xcel, and I moved into this role over the last couple of months, and we're really excited to have her here to talk about her vision for our partnership. And I'd like to just welcome Iffy to the community and give her an opportunity. I think she's already been elevated. So Iffy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council, for allowing me to come and speak to you tonight. I'm really excited to be here. Fairly new to the Xcel community and the Boulder community. I started with Xcel in November. What excited me about this partnership and moving forward is an opportunity for us to have a new start to our partnership and an opportunity to partner and collaborate. And that's the lens that I will be looking at this partnership, is through a lens of collaboration and partnership, with the idea of knowing that we're working together to meet an overarching goal of clean energy and energy efficiency in your community. I know the Boulder community is very excited and has a lot of innovative ideas to bring to the table with this idea. So I look forward to hearing all the diverse opinions and opportunities to listen to the diverse opportunities that I'll have in the community with different community members, as well as the city. The city has been great partners with us, with the city staff. A number of the members that were on the slides that Carolyn mentioned before in her presentation were people that I've had the opportunity to work very closely with. And with our Xcel partnership and my colleagues, we're all coming with a view of collective impact and how we approach this partnership moving forward. So thank you for the opportunity to come to you before Council and Mr. Mayor tonight. I look forward to getting to know each of you, and we are very excited about this partnership and opportunity to continue to partner with the City of Boulder. Thanks, Carolyn.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Iffy. So I think we can go to the next slide, and I'll kick it back to Jonathan to lead us through the questions to you, Council, and answer any questions that you might have of us.
Thanks, Carolyn. And it'll be another quick handoff back to Rachel. And I think the questions, just to wrap this up, again, we wanted to just clarify if there were any questions, thoughts, or concerns about the wrap up or repayment of the general fund with respect to municipalization. And then the second and third question really are on the partnership, whether or not council has questions or thoughts about the goals or structure of the partnership, or any of the identified projects or programs that Carolyn walked through in her part of the presentation. And then, as Carolyn also mentioned, we'd love to hear from council if you have thoughts or preferences around the communications and future updates on the energy partnership, both as we think about communicating back with council and then the community. So those are the questions that we have tonight. And Rachel, I'd love to turn it back to you for discussion with council.
Thanks, Jonathan and Carolyn, and welcome to Boulder, Iffy. And thanks for being here with us tonight. And nice job moving through that quickly and trying to get us a little closer to back on track. So first I'll open it up to council, just general questions on the presentation, and then we'll move to discussion and answer the 3 questions that Jonathan has teed up. So any questions? I see Mark Wallach out of the gate, and then we'll go to Sam and whoever else gets a hand up. Mark.
My questions are actually relating to the memo that accompanied this presentation. And in that, I read that the cost of undergrounding as a citywide project is going to be $500 million. Is that correct?
So I think we're estimating it as somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. I'm sorry, and to which project? I'm sorry, I'm buying
the undergrounding
of a specific project or the total investment? The
total investment in undergrounding. If I read the staff memo correctly, that the number was $500 million. And
that's accurate.
My question is that the memo also states that there's $33 million available over the next 20 years from Xcel. And if we are reliant only upon that revenue stream, this project would take us 300 years to complete. So I'm wondering, do we have a more advanced timetable for that, and how would we how do we intend to accelerate that process? Because I think 300 years would not be very satisfactory to most people in Boulder.
Yes, now I understand your question, and thank you for that, Councilman Wallach. Yeah, so we've done an estimate, and that includes undergrounding every single residential feeder, as well as the entire backbone of the system. And so what we know is that we can greatly improve reliability by undergrounding even just a small section of that in the very near term. And that's how we're prioritizing the $33 million investment. I think it's a very important conversation for the community that we'll be having moving forward as to how we collectively share in the cost of the balance of that system. Because once we start to get to those lower level feeders, we're really talking more about aesthetics as opposed to really enhancing our resilience. And so I think that is a conversation we definitely want to start to have with the community and see what kind of cost sharing mechanisms we can put in place and other investment. But yes, the portion that Xcel covers through the 1% is estimated, and we're projecting about $33 million over the term of the franchise.
Okay.
Mark, can I colloquy? I just have a follow-up. I appreciate that. So in the memo, it also says undergrounding distribution main lines will yield the largest benefit in terms of reliability. So I was curious if you've got a breakdown, because Mark's right, 500 million is very daunting, and it would be many, many years, many centuries, in fact, before we got there. But the biggest bang for the buck is with the bigger lines. So is there any kind of breakdown that lets us know about how much it would take to get the main distribution lines underground and not everyone to the home or business?
Yeah, so we don't have that number yet, Mayor, but what we do have is we've gotten from Xcel through non-disclosure at this point, the reliability data to really identify what those key segments and lines are, where we do see the greatest reliability issues, as well as the greatest customer benefit, so meaning the number of people served by that main line. So we do hope to have that estimate later this year as part of that 5-year plan.
And my other question would be, after what we've seen in Texas, besides undergrounding, are there any things we need to do with our energy system to make it more resilient going forward, so we don't have the same experience that they do, even though we have different climatic conditions?
Yeah, so first, I would say we have a very good partner in Xcel who has operated in extreme weather events and cold climate and has a pretty robust management plan for their gas service. I think a lot of what you saw in Texas really has to do with the fact that they have very inefficient heating systems because they don't rely on it routinely, combined with a poor plan for how they manage that gas usage and electrical consumption that went with that. So we definitely, I think, have a much more robust system to start with. But as we look to that, I think it's really a matter of really planning what our low growth could look like and continuing to deploy some of the most efficient and resilient management approaches that our community has really been a leader in. We do have pockets of concern. We certainly are ramping up our programs focused on our manufactured housing communities as an example, which we know continue to be very vulnerable to the impact. So the city's been increasing investment directly for weatherization in our manufactured communities. So I think those are things that we very much flagged. And then considering to look at things like how we may deploy microgrids through our projects at Alpine Balsam and Chautauqua, and thinking about how those could be more scaled to enhance our resilience. So those are things we've certainly flagged through the partnership to try and mitigate, because we do know that we're going to see continuing climatic events. We saw the fires this summer. We know that people are having to shelter more and more in buildings, which increases their loads. We've seen that with COVID. So making sure that we have a resilient electricity system to that kind of load change is really important.
And my last question would be on streetlights. Do we have a timetable for conversion to LED?
Yeah, I think once we make a decision on whether we want to acquire the system, and a few nuances to that is under Xcel's current program, they would cover the retrofit of about 60% of our lights. The balance we would have to pay for. So we're trying to estimate that cost. Once we have the green light, it's a fairly rapid process to convert the lights. So I'd say something on the order of 6 months could get us fully converted. I do think we want to work with the community really to understand what that plan is, because we know changing out the streetlights, changing out the lighting quality is not always a smooth event. And so we want to make sure we work closely with the community to manage that process and meet their expectations, and make sure we have the customer service to back up that conversion if we do identify issues. So I would say we'd probably plan for a full year deployment, but the complete conversion is a relatively rapid process.
Okay, thank you. And that's all I got.
Thanks, Mark. Sam, and then Mary.
Great, thanks for the presentation, much appreciated. I have a few comments I'll save till the end, but my first question is, has the executive team had a meeting yet? I believe the executive team is our city manager and the CEO of Piesco, Xcel, Colorado, and some others around them. So has that met yet? And what are the plans for communicating out the results of those meetings?
So our plan is to really kick off the executive team meetings as well as the associated public meetings starting in April. So they have not met yet, but we're working to get that on folks' calendars. We did want to make sure that we have our community engagement plan around that to make sure that there's good transparency before we really kick that process off.
I want to add one piece to that, if you don't mind. Sam, thanks for the question. I do want to report, though, that we do meet weekly with senior leadership at Xcel to talk about how we are standing up this partnership, specifically around some of the near-term projects and actions and around the governance structure. So while the executive team has not yet met, I think we have had a really clear line of communication. Your second question about how we'll report that, I don't think we have really tackled that one yet. And so we'll take that under advisement in terms of how we can really report out on the activities and the discussions.
Super, thanks much. And then I want to follow up on Mark's questions about resilience. And I love the answers that you gave there. That was wonderful. Another component of this, some of which is inside our boundaries, but much of which is outside of our boundaries, is wildfire impacts. And I know that there's a little bit of work that's starting. I know there's some money the PUC allowed Xcel to be spending on planning for this. But I was curious how we're going to incorporate the wildfire question into our resilience planning working with Xcel.
Let me start, Carol, and then you'll probably have a better answer. And I would start by saying we need to walk before we can run. Part of what we've been able to start teeing up in our conversations with Xcel is really starting to transfer some of that important data to us in terms of how our system currently functions, where the hotspots and perhaps reliability concerns might be. And then, as Caroline, I think, really accurately pointed out, what are the right tactics that we can deploy at the local level? What are the right tactics that we can think about more in a more regional basis? So I really appreciate that you're bringing up the wildfire issue, because there are all types of threats to our energy system. And how do we think about local generation? How do we think about microgridding? How do we think about islanding? How do we think about undergrounding? All of those tactics to really protect and harden the system, but also create benefits in real time as well. So that's something that we have started discussions with, but I don't think we have a full answer to your question. Carolyn may have a better response, though.
No, I think that was beautiful, Jonathan. I don't really have anything to add. Although, we do know that there's a lot of work going on right now to harden the resilience of our main transmission system around the community. So that's the project that's been ongoing and will continue with the work. It's up near Boulder Hydro at this point, really looking to improve those large towers, their resistance to start, their durability, their ability to prevent starting fires, as well as keeping them above the tree canopy so that they aren't as susceptible. So I mean, that work has been ongoing, but I think, as Jonathan said, it's a conversation that's just really starting and has a lot of opportunity to really grow from here.
Super, that's all great. And I don't have any more questions, but it does seem like our utilities folks also, particularly water supply, have to look at the wildfire question as well. So maybe there's synergies there too. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sam. Mary, and then I have one question.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you, Jonathan and Iffy and Carolyn, for your presentations. I have kind of want to follow up on some with the streetlights question that Mark was asking. I'm curious about this piece in the memo with respect to streetlights mentioned that there would be multiple pathways to achieve our street lighting goals. And I'm wondering how that plays in with, the memo talks about just replacing the lights, but it doesn't talk about the poles that the lights are on. It doesn't talk about fixtures, such as I would assume that those lights would have to comply with dark skies. How does maintenance play into that? And how does equity play into that? I mean, which neighborhoods would come first and how would all of that be handled? So I'm just curious about kind of a more holistic approach to the street lighting question, and cost-wise and also kind of management-wise.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and thank you very much for framing it that way. What I would cite is, I think that's the reason we haven't moved forward with just working under Xcel's existing offering to convert our lights, is because we know that as a community, we really want to go deeper and explore right sizing our lighting system to really address the current community needs. Addressing things like making sure we're more aligned with our dark skies. So our plan is to really go out, and we're planning to issue a request for proposals coming up to start to get ideas from the lighting community as to what the cost of that might look like. So it would look at all sorts of options to include redesign of key components of our system, which would replace existing light poles and lights to right size them. So removing some fixtures, adding different ones, so that we can ultimately present the council and the community with a range of options, from just a simple retrofit all the way to, what would be a more holistically designed system that is more aligned with kind of what our standards have been for how the city has deployed our 400 lights so far. So that is our goal and our deliverable that we're planning to present you with later this year, hopefully, assuming we have success with that request for proposals and getting those numbers, because it will be ranges. The acquisition is the smallest issue of the whole process, right? It's not buying the lights. It's making sure that we're thoughtful in how we deploy and continue to invest in those.
Thank you, Carolyn. And I also was curious about the structure of the rates. The memo talked about that. And what does the PUC play a role in this? Yes.
And so I think that's, so right now, the 4,700 lights I referred to that are Xcel's are non-metered. And so we pay a monthly charge for those. It's called a street lighting rate, in which there's all sorts of components into that rate that include depreciation of those lights, as well as some operation and maintenance, as well as the energy charge that goes within that. When you have a metered light or more of a metered rate, you're taking out some of those other costs like depreciation of the light and such, which greatly lowers the cost. All of the city's lights, the 400 that we own, are metered. So we're actually paying an even lower rate for those, but that comes at an investment cost for that infrastructure to be able to meter those. So those are the trade-offs we're going to have to explore, but that is set at the Public Utilities Commission. They review those. And, we're really working with a design that's decades old and really hasn't been modernized. And I think that's why you see Xcel working with so many communities right now to explore what's the best way to meet their lighting needs, just because they don't have as much opportunity to really make that a flexible design to meet specific communities' needs. And so I think that's why they've been working with us to explore the potential acquisition option, which would give us a greater control over that.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, I have one question, then we'll turn to discussion. And it's a little bit similar to what Mark was asking, and I'm guessing we were all kind of reading this memo, at the same time as we were watching what was happening in the dire situation in Texas. So I was struck when I was reading it, looking at the undergrounding considerations. We did put an emphasis on reliability and mitigation of risk and equity. But then we also mentioned things like the view shed. And so I was just thinking, given the gravity of what we've seen play out in Texas, is it appropriate to be, looking at preserving view sheds at this point when we're talking about undergrounding, or until we have equity in place and reliability locked in and fire hazards mitigated? Why is that coming up in the memo, or how much are we looking at it?
Yeah, I think it's a component. I think that's why we tried to articulate, kind of the weighting factors and criteria that we're going to put out there and get feedback from the community on that prioritization. I would say first and foremost, our investment is going to be prioritized towards any kind of hazard mitigation. So that could include, as we talked about, potential ignition sources for fire, which, I don't think we have very many of those, that's what we're exploring, as well as, we are subject to flooding. And so considering things that could, systems that could create debris patterns, those would be the first and foremost. Reliability is second. I think, if there's a trade-off consideration, that might be where viewshed comes into play. But certainly, recognizing the magnitude of investment that's needed, I don't foresee that we would see any early investment prioritized towards something that's strictly viewshed, but it might be a factor into how you design or how far you take it or other considerations.
Okay, thanks for that. I guess maybe I'll just circle back to it in discussion. Okay, so I'm going to turn now to discussion and go through the 3 specific questions that staff asked, and then open it up for general comments or discussion after that. So the first question is, does council have any questions about the municipalization wrap-up or repayment of the general fund? Any questions on that? Or comments, perhaps? I've got a merry thumbs up. All right, moving on to question 2. Does council have any questions about the goals and structure of the energy partnership, or any identified projects or programs? Any specific questions there? Okay, third, council have any questions or preferences around communications and future updates on the energy partnership? All right, let's just open it up to random discussion then. Sam, I know you were holding some stuff back, and I'm going to probably want to circle back to the $500 million in the view shed. So I'm going to assume your hand's up, Sam, and turn to you if that's okay. And anyone else?
Thanks. I guess I want to say that I really appreciate the framework around the undergrounding decision-making process. I think that's a good way to kick it off, because I think we're going to want frameworks around, lots of projects, how we prioritize them, and how we have equity as well as protection are as driver considerations. I mean, at the center and CMAP of our triangle of solutions and actions is equity and resilience. So I think those are perfect. And I think those are the right filters to kind of look at everything with. So I guess given that context, I look forward to learning more about the projects that get identified. We know Alpine Balsam, for instance, and we know undergrounding, but I guess the question about communication is really interesting, because there's a subset of us who will be really interested in things like, how's the distribution planning working? Because that's not something that Xcel has done before, is work with a community on distribution system planning. So I think, among the group of us who care about that, it will be really interesting to both hear it in our community, but also it would be interesting to know how that might be used in other communities. So in other words, are other communities interested in that component? For us, it was a big deal because resilience is a huge driver. And I would be curious to know if there are other communities interested in that or other aspects of what we're doing. So I think the communication portion of this needs to continue to develop in a way that there's geeks, and communicating with the geeks is important, but also showing the relevance to the wider community. I think, between the wildfires in California this year and a couple of years previous and what just happened in Texas, I think there will be interest in it, but it will not be in a very technical, geeky way, but it's going to be, what are we doing in our partnership with Xcel that is going to make a difference in our community's ability to get through those things. So I think this is a great kickoff, and I guess that word brings me to one other point. I do think we want to have a kickoff event, once kind of our feet are under us and COVID's ramping down and the partnership is ramping up and the PUC has had its say. I think it would be good to have a kickoff event where our community gets to meet some of the Xcel principals who will be working with us, and we talk about how we want to hear their inputs on these things and introduce our advisory group to the community. So I think it's a great start. Kudos to everyone for that. And I look forward to seeing how it evolves.
Well said, Sam. No other takers? I mean, we can go for hours on the muni.
Love the way this is going.
Right? I mean, so I'll summarize here. If truly nobody else wants to chime in, and just reiterate that, what I was getting at is, while we're looking at a $500 million in undergrounding, I would think a lot of it in the near future would be on those top three considerations of mitigation and reliability and equity. And until those are really locked in, I just don't understand why we would be looking at things like view shed. So hope that is the plan and that I'm reading it correctly. And then I will just distill, I think, some of the priorities that I heard tonight, which is resiliency and especially concern over things like wildfires and undergrounding in that context. Some emphasis on streetlights and dark skies. And then I think I heard Sam say he wants us to distill communications kind of for laymen and have a party. So did I get that right? And I think that's it. So thank you so much for that presentation and the update. And this is exciting. And I think we're all looking forward to getting another update soon.
Thank you all. Really appreciate all the feedback tonight. Super helpful.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks so much.
And then I guess I lied earlier in the meeting when I said we have 2 discussion points, because we have 3. And Jonathan left. So I'm assuming we answered all of his questions, although I should have clarified that. If you're still there, Jonathan, anything else you need?
Right. No, I don't think so. I think just to be clear, we will be bringing back kind of answers to your questions and thinking about a regular update for council. It may be in the form of IPs, because I think there were some things that were brought up that we can easily respond to. So just know that we want to strengthen the communication line between both the work that's going on in council and, of course, the community.
Perfect. Thank you. So it's a very brief third item. It's a quick city attorney recruitment update around the firm selection and a draft recruitment timeline. So I don't know if I'm over to Chris Meschuk and Jen Sprinkle, or if I am supposed to stay with this. So over to Chris, maybe as a question.
To Jen, yeah.
Jen.
I've got it. Good evening, Council. I'm Jen Sprinkle, HR Director for the City of Boulder. The city attorney recruitment process begins this week with the recruitment firm, the Novak Group. So the city has an existing recruitment contract with the Novak Group, which is part of Ref Telus. This week, the recruiter will kick off the city attorney recruitment with the council subcommittee. And then next week, the recruiter will meet with council members 2 by 2 for position backgrounding and discovery discussion. So council members, you will hear from us by the end of business Thursday to schedule these meetings. So keep that on your radar for next week. The recruiter will also meet with attorneys in the city attorney's office, the interim city manager, as well as gather feedback through a survey to additional city attorney staff and department directors. And then as we move through the timeline, the week of March 8th, the position profile will be drafted and then presented to council for approval at the March 16th regular meeting. After that, the recruiter will begin active recruitment through advertising and candidate outreach. Active recruitment will last 5 weeks, and note that candidate applications will be due by April 25th. The recruiter then, after that process, will present confidential candidate materials to council members the week of May 5th. Council members will be asked then to read applications and provide feedback to the recruiter and the council subcommittee. And then the week of May 17th, Council members will have the opportunity to interview the finalists again 2 by 2. There will also be an opportunity for community feedback once the finalists are determined. And we anticipate the next city attorney joining the city of Boulder in the month of June. And any questions?
Thanks, Jen. And I just wanted to clarify, as a member of this recruitment subcommittee, obviously we're not voting on anything tonight, but we wanted to bring this to you because we're really trying to hammer out a pretty fast timeline, because we have a narrow window to have someone begin this job and overlap with Tom Carr in time for his anticipated retirement. So where it says that we have selected the Novak group, I would say we are recommending that we do that. And if anybody had concerns with working with Heather on this, this would be an appropriate time to flag that concern. My personal feeling as a member of the subcommittee is, again, we are trying to hit the ground running, and Heather has been wonderful on the city manager search. And I think that it would be a very natural thing for us to move into the same format and kind of know what we're getting from Heather. And I think it will be pretty seamless. So that's my take on why it would be good to hire her for this as well. And I see a couple of hands up. So I'm going to go over to, I'm going to go Mary and then Aaron.
I think Aaron had his hand up first, so I'll let Aaron go.
Thank you. I shut my participants box, so I had to guess.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, so I think this is fantastic. You know, as Mary and I, of course, have been the city manager search subcommittee, and working with Heather has been a pleasure. She does an extraordinary job, and I would be thrilled to have her continue on to help us select the next city attorney.
Thanks, Aaron. Mary?
Yeah, and I agree with Aaron, and I just want to add that the process for the city manager selection has gone so smoothly. Jen and Heather have coordinated everything pretty seamlessly, and things have gone off without a hitch. And staying with the same team, a proven success. So I would recommend staying with Heather.
Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else have questions or concerns about the direction this subcommittee is going?
I just would jump in here and say, do we want to talk about membership at all on the city attorney?
Happy to.
I see Mark's hand up. That might be inappropriate.
Well, my question, I've had wonderful experiences with Heather, but my question is, how many city attorney searches has her firm conducted? Acknowledging that recruitment of attorneys is a little bit different than recruitment of city managers. And so I guess I'm just asking, what's the direct applicable experience?
I don't have the exact number, but I can tell you that this firm has a current active recruitment for a city attorney and also a county attorney. So these are active attorney recruitments that they are working on.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Heather. I think maybe Bob has the new hand up. I don't know, Mary, if Mark, if your hands are old there.
Old.
Old. All right, Bob.
Following the old hands. I want to answer Sam's question. Mark and I have had a discussion. So Mark was going to serve on this committee in partnership with Rachel. And as we discussed last week, Erin and I had raised our hands, have not yet been appointed to the CU South process subcommittee. Mark and I have had a discussion, and not to confuse folks, but I think we're going to propose to council next week, and it'll be council's decision that we actually swap places, and that I serve on the process committee for the city attorney with Rachel, and that Mark serve on the CU South process committee with Erin. That'll obviously be a vote of council next week, but just to tee that up in response to Sam's question.
Thanks for that, Bob. I don't know if we want to flag any concerns with that. Bob and Mark horse trading amongst themselves discussion. Obviously, we can't vote on anything tonight. Adam?
I'm sure we'll hear about it.
Thanks for that. Yes, I think that's true. And again, that will be, as I understand it, taken to council next week for a vote. Any other concerns tonight? And then back to the subcommittee for city attorney recruitment. Sounds like no concerns there. So I think we're gonna wrap that up and move forward as planned. And thank you, Jen, for all the work you're doing on both of these recruitments. I know you're working extra hard right now. Okay, thank you. So I think that wraps up agenda item 3. Jen, did you need anything else on this or questions, concerns before we move? And Tom, I see you for the first time on camera tonight. Did you want to weigh in on that? Good to see you. Jen, did you need anything else from us here tonight before we move on?
No, we're all set. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, if there are no more hands, I believe that concludes our council business for tonight, and we are formally adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks for a good meeting, Rachel.
Way to make up for, the lengthy number 1 on 2 and 3. Go team. Good job.
Bye, everybody.
All right, good night, everybody.
Which you just mentioned. And also witnesses have sort of spotted 2 notorious military troops in both Yangon and Mandalay. So in Mandalay,